If you don't like scary stories or anything paranormal, you're gonna want to skip this video today. This might be the most insane one that's been sent because not only is it paranormal, but it's tied to a notorious serial unaliver, and though he's not named, pretty sure I think I know who it is. Let's get reading. The email reads, "Hi Casey, I need to keep both my name and my friend's name out of this. A few years ago, my best friend took an ancestry test because she had never known who her biological father was. The results connected her to several relatives of a very infamous serial unaliver from the 1970s. And no, I'm not going to say his name. At first, we thought the match had to be through some distant cousin. It wasn't. One of the relatives contacted her privately. After comparing the percentage of shared DNA, birthdays, and where her mother lived at the time, there were only a couple of possible explanations. My friend confronted her mom. Her mom broke down and admitted that she had known him before his final arrest. She had suspected for years that he could be the father, but never told anybody because she wanted her daughter to have a normal life. This is where shit gets really weird. A few days after learning the truth, my friend started seeing women inside of her apartment. Never clearly. It would be someone standing in the hallway or sitting at the kitchen table until she looked directly at them, and there was always more than one. Eventually, she started waking up and finding them gathered around her bed. They never touched her or spoke. They just stood there facing outward, like they were watching the doors and windows. My friend assumed they were his victims. One night, she finally asked what they wanted. Every woman turned toward the bedroom doorway. There was a man standing there. She couldn't see his face, but she immediately knew who it was. The women joined hands around her bed. The man stayed in the doorway until sunrise. This happened almost every night for months. The women would arrive first. Then he would appear somewhere outside of their circle. My friend said he seemed to get a little closer each time. Last week, she called me crying. The women hadn't come. Her apartment felt completely empty, and for the first time since taking the DNA test, she couldn't sense anyone watching her. I told her it was probably a good thing. She said, "No, you don't understand. They weren't haunting me." Of course, I asked her what she meant by that, and she got all weird and panicky and hung up the phone. I kept texting her, calling her. She didn't answer for days. I kind of fucking panicked. But then eventually she ended up calling me back days later and acted completely normal. When I asked her about what she had meant, she acted like she had no idea what I was talking about. She also insists she never took an ancestry test and says her biological father died before she was born. I've known this woman for 20 years. That is not what her mother told us. I don't think the victims were trying to scare her. I think they were keeping him from finding his daughter. And I think the night they disappeared was the night they finally lost. First of all, thank you so much for sending in your story. I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably gonna jet pretty quick. Usually I have a whole spiel, but I'm pretty freaked out because this is the second night in a row that weird shit has been happening while I'm reading these stories. For all of you who are like, why the fuck is this bitch dressed as Yzma? I do special effect makeup. It was either I don't read you guys a story tonight because I have to take all of this off, or I read it to you guys while I'm in my special effect makeup. So there's your answer for that. But I wish I had more to say like I normally do. I don't. I'm really weirded out right now. If you want to send in your scary story, send it to the email above. I'm weirded out, y'all. Let me know what you think in the comments.
Story time about my first ever paranormal experience in my first ever healthcare job. So I just turned 17, landed my first ever job as a healthcare support worker in a local care home where I lived. It was literally 2 minutes up the road. And yeah, I was really excited to start this care home. So just a bit of context about the care home. Part of it used to be an old church. So opposite the care home there was a vicarage where the vicars would stay when they travelled up to the church, and then on the back of the home there was a graveyard. That's not relevant. I've never seen anything in that part of the home. Kind of sets the scene for something a bit spooky. So yeah, a couple months in, they rotated me on for night shift, and I'd never done a night shift there, and I was rotated on with another girl. I think there was about 30 residents, so it was just us two looking after these residents. So yeah, I got on halfway through the night shift. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we got up to do our checks, our 2-hourly checks, just to, you know, give pressure care relief, check if anyone needed anything. Anyway, just to set the scene, when we went upstairs, there's a really, really long landing, and at the end of the landing is a big window, and when you look out the window, it's a painted glass window that looks into the manager's office. The office is always locked. It's got residents' petty cash in, so it is never open unless the manager is in there. We don't have access to those keys. So yeah, anybody being in there was virtually impossible. The manager wasn't in there. Anyway, I was walking along this landing, and as I was walking along, it caught my eye that I thought I saw someone moving in there. But it was 3 o'clock in the morning, my first ever night shift that I'd ever done. I was only 17. And I thought delirium has officially set in. I'm going crazy. So I turned around and said to my colleague, I swear I've just seen someone in that office. She was like, no way. I said, no, like genuinely, I think I've seen someone in that office. Anyway, we both walked to the end of the landing, and we both pressed our faces against this window to look directly opposite into the manager's office, into the different building. Now this room was dark, obviously, but it was lit up by the desktop screen that was left on, so the whole room was lit up blue. You could still see into the room, you could see the chair and the computer and other bits in the room. And as we've pressed our face against this window, clear as day, you can see someone with what I'd only describe as a flat cap walking around that office. And as we've pressed our faces against that window and looked, it looked as though he turned and looked at us, and both of us, I genuinely am telling the truth, both of us pulled away at the same time, looked at each other, and that was it. That was it. We were freaked out for the rest of the night. We didn't leave each other's sides. We literally stuck together for the rest of that shift. And then in the morning, all the day staff came on, and some of them had been working there for years, like 15, 16 years. And we were telling them about this experience, about how crazy it was, like how we can't explain it, I don't know what it was. They were not shocked. When I tell you, some of them had like numerous ghost stories from their shifts. One colleague even turned around and said to me, why do you think I don't do night shift here? Great, thanks for telling me. I'm 17, for God's sake. But that is a story that I tell people, and to this day they're like, nah. But I genuinely can't explain it. And like, even working in a hospital, I've heard noises and like call bells have gone off, like other people have said that's happened to them. And sometimes you can explain these things away, like, oh, it just must be a fault or whatever. But I genuinely cannot explain what me and someone else seen at the same time, and we both seen the same thing, and it being virtually impossible. No one was in that office. It was just us two in that building. So yeah, that was my first ever paranormal encounter in care. I've never seen anything since, and that is the only time that I've ever laid eyes on anything like that. But it is creepy enough 10 years later that I still tell people that story, and I still think about it all the time, and I think about what it was, who it was. But yeah, crazy. Yeah.
Okay, I just had to call y'all. Yes, I said call. So I could tell y'all about the experience that I had when I was at my boyfriend's house. Okay. So over the few months that we were getting to know each other before he asked me to be his girlfriend, you know, he decided that, you know, we would ask each other questions. And so one day he went ahead and told me, like, well, this set and other few items I took from my dad when he passed away. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, he took the bed set and stuff. It's a nice bed set. It's a huge bed set, you know. And I was like, oh, okay, that's nice. I'm sure you didn't want to let that go. One night, I stayed the night with him, and I'm knocked out cold. I feel him getting up, and I was like, where are you going? He said, I'm going to the bathroom. I was like, okay. lay back down. But I feel him get back in the bed and cuddle up with me. And so I'm comfortable again. I could even feel like a stroke on my head, like somebody was rubbing my head, right? Then I see his room door opening, and it's him. And I said, she said, what? I said, you just got in this bed. I just felt you get in this bed. And he was like, don't freak out. So he told me already that he's had plenty of experiences. He smells his dad's cologne. He'll feel his dad sitting in the bed sometimes, but I've got a few glimpses out the corner of my eye, but he won't reveal himself to me. But I was like, what? All right, now, Papa, don't be getting in the bed now.
If you get scared easily, now's the time to scroll. Or if you do not get scared easily, welcome back to another episode I like to call Scary Ass Stories That Y'all Send Me. This time we're talking about Ouija boards, so you know it's good. Person who sent me this email did not specify whether or not they wanted to remain anonymous, so for the story's sake, I'm just going to call her Ella. Now, Ella immediately discloses that she sent me 2 different stories that both happened in her mother's old childhood home. Ella also prefaces that nothing was happening paranormally in the home prior to her mom and her 3 sisters playing a Ouija board. After her mom and her sisters were playing with the Ouija board, things started to ramp up significantly. The first paranormal experience that her mom had in the house was right after they had played with the Ouija board. Their mom, so Ella's grandmother, had a routine of after she would get groceries, she would come home and call for the kids. I feel like this is pretty common practice. I had this happen to me when I was little. However, all 4 girls were hanging out in the house, probably upstairs, when they clear as day heard their mom, Ella's grandmother, calling for them to put the groceries away. So they all run downstairs, and lo and behold, there is no one there. Their mom hadn't returned from getting groceries, and there was nobody in the house. I think this particular story is a little chilling because all 4 of them heard the same thing at the same time, and all of them reacted the same way. Just a brief trigger warning for the second story because it is pretty heavy with the content. Ella includes that her mom and her sisters were playing with this Ouija board because they thought it was just fun and games. And for context purposes, Ella's grandmother's first child had passed away during childbirth. It's important to note that nobody in the family knew about this, and it only recently came up in conversation where the grandmother disclosed what had happened. One of the spirits that Ella's mom was contacting through the board claimed to be this child. This spirit/entity knew things about the family that nobody else would, and it got so scary to the point where they wrote everything down, and I guess every single thing that the spirit said would happen really did happen later on. And this ranged from knowing how many children each of them were going to have, how many marriages they were each going to have, and when these things were going to happen. Ella's mom had no idea who they were talking to, and the spirit in the board said, "Go look in the top drawer. Your mom has something there that makes her cry." Ella's mom wrote it down, and they moved on when all of a sudden the spirit began saying, I can only imagine this feverishly being spelled out, but the spirit was saying, "Do not play this board. It's real. It's bad. Burn it. Get rid of it. I can't talk for long." And the planchette just stopped moving. There were no more spirits coming through the board. The planchette was not moving, and nothing was answering the questions that they had. At this point, everybody's scared. They all go downstairs to talk to Ella's grandmother, so their mother, and asked about the letter. And sure enough, she had a letter from her sister-in-law at the time that had been sent to her overseas while she was expecting her baby. The letter itself had arrived after the child was born, since she was born overseas. Ella's grandmother kept it ever since. Grandmother had kept it for all those years, and every single time she would read it, she would cry, just like the board said. And if you've been here a long time, then you know exactly what I'm going to say. I personally believe that Ouija boards are not toys. They're not things to be played with. When you call out to one thing, you call out to all things. I think that there's a very fine line that we dance between with the spirit world and our world, especially when we're seeking things like that out. I get a lot of comments of people who don't believe in that stuff. I totally get it. It is one of those things that you have to experience yourself and have a what the hell just happened moment. Those experiences are life-changing. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories.
I was covering night shift at a care home in Southend last winter. Quiet building, 20 rooms, One long corridor with that pale nightlight running along the floor. The manager told me on day 1, room 3A is empty. Don't go in unless you have to, the heating's busted. I nodded. Standard empty room stuff. The first week was boring. Rounds every 2 hours, check doors, log everything. On Thursday at 2:17 a.m, I was doing rounds and then I heard it. A faint tapping from 3A. Tap, tap, tap. Like fingernails on the inside of the door. I told myself it was the pipes, and I wrote odd noise 3A in the log and moved on. Next night, same time, 2:17 a.m. Tapping again. This time, there was a whisper right after. I couldn't make out words, just that breathy sound when people are half asleep. The door was cold, colder than the rest of the corridor, and I put my hand on the handle and it didn't turn, it was locked. Friday, I asked one of the day staff, Mrs. Patel. She went pale. You heard her too? Who? Mrs. Kaur. She was in 3A for 3 years. Dementia. She used to get up every night at 2:15 to make tea for her husband. He died in 2018. I asked why the room was locked. The family asked us to keep it closed. They said they could still hear her sometimes on the baby monitor they left there. I laughed it off until Saturday, 2:17 a.m. Tapping. Then the whisper. But it was clearer this time. The kettle's on, love. My blood went ice. Because that's exactly what the note said that she used to say to her husband. I didn't open the door. I sat at the nurse's station and I watched the CCTV. The hallway cam showed nothing, just me sitting there. At 2:19, the motion sensor in 3A flicked on. For 4 seconds, then off. The room's empty and it has been for 8 months. I quit that week. Last month, I got a text from Mrs. Patel. New girls on nights. She's heard tapping in 3A at 2:17 a.m. I haven't been back. But sometimes, at 2:17 a.m, my own kettle clicks on by itself.
So in my early 30s, I was dating a guy that we'll call Marcus, and he lived right across the road from this giant graveyard, and I mean it had thousands of graves. Every evening after work, me and Marcus would sit on the porch together, listen to music, and talk about our day, and we noticed that every Thursday around 3 o'clock, this same old woman would come to the graveyard. For months, rain, sleet, or shine, hot or cold, every Thursday at 3 o'clock, we would see her sitting at that grave talking for hours. Of course, we would always throw our hand up and wave at her, and she would wave back. Well, then something really bad happened. Marcus's grandmother passed away, and she was buried in that graveyard right across the road from our house. So me and Marcus go out there, we put flowers on her grave. Marcus is crying, he's upset, and that old woman, she's there visiting that grave. She sees us. So she walks over, we introduce ourselves. She was very polite, very nice. She offered us condolences, said that she was sorry he lost his grandmother, just a sweet lady. Marcus said, well, I see you out here every week. Who did you lose? She said, my husband died 30 years ago. Marcus said, wait, you've been coming out to visit your husband's grave every Thursday at 3 o'clock for 30 years? She said, yes, sir. Marcus said, that's really sweet. I hope that one day somebody loves me as much as you love your husband. She said, oh, I don't do this out of love. And then she started walking back down the path towards her husband's grave. Y'all, she gets halfway down the path and then turns around and says, oh, don't forget to come visit your loved ones or they just might come visit you. When she said that, I had goosebumps all over my arms. The hair on my neck was standing up. She freaked me out. Me and Marcus both just look at each other like, what does she mean by that? Is that why she comes out here so her husband doesn't visit her?
What would you do if you found out that someone was live streaming inside of your home and you were not there? Now, before I tell this story, I obviously have no way to verify whether any of this actually happened. It was sent to me by a follower who I'm just going to call Tyler, and he claimed that everything you're about to hear happened only a few months ago. So take it as entertainment and decide for yourselves. But I'll tell you this, even if half of what he said is true, I don't know how he ever slept inside of his house ever again. Now, if someone ever sends you a live stream link and you recognize your own living room, don't open it, because that's exactly what happened to Tyler. Now, a few weeks ago, a follower named Tyler reached out to me, and his email wasn't very long. In fact, it was only only just a few paragraphs. But attached to it were several screenshots that he asked me not to share because, according to him, the police had already taken copies of everything and it is a still ongoing investigation. He included one request, and he pretty much said, if anyone recognizes this story, please don't tell people where I live. And that immediately caught my attention because people don't usually ask for, not always to be left anonymous unless they're genuinely afraid of something. So Tyler is 29 years old and he lives alone, and he works for IT in a manufacturing company, and by his own admission, his life is almost painfully predictable, right? Every weekday he leaves for work at exactly 7:30 in the morning. He gets home around 6, feeds his dogs, makes dinner, goes to the gym, and then he spends the rest of his evening gaming until he goes to bed. Nothing unusual, nothing paranormal, just a quiet, ordinary routine. And that all changed on one Tuesday afternoon. So around lunchtime, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and it contained only a simple sentence, and it said, "You're not supposed to leave your windows open." There was no photo, no explanation, there was nothing else attached to it. So Tyler had assumed it was spam. He deleted it and he went back to work without thinking much about anything else. So 29 minutes later, another notification had appeared. This time, it was an Instagram message request from an account with no followers, no profile picture, no post, nothing. And the message just read, "You missed something," followed by a link. Tyler almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of him and he tapped the link. And he opened the live stream. And at first, the screen was completely blank, right? Then the camera adjusted and Tyler felt his stomach drop. He instantly recognized what he was looking at, and it was his own living room. Not an old video, not an old photograph, a live video, his couch, his coffee table, his television, everything exactly where it should have been, where he left it. Even his dog was lying asleep on the rug. Tyler checked the timestamp and it said live. And his first thought was that maybe one of his security cameras had somehow been hacked by somebody. Then he remembered something that made the situation a little bit worse. He didn't own any security cameras like that. Not inside, not outside, nothing. The phone that was broadcasting that live stream had to physically be inside of his house. So for almost a full minute, nothing happened. Then footsteps echoed through the house, and the camera began moving slowly from room to room, almost like someone was casually giving a real estate tour of his house. It drifted into the hallway, then into the kitchen, where it stopped in front of a refrigerator, and whoever was holding the phone opened the door, grabbed one of Tyler's bottled waters, unscrewed the cap, took a drink, closed the refrigerator, and continued walking throughout the house without saying a single word. He began to panic, so he called his next door neighbor, who did not answer. He called again, still nothing. Then he dialed 911 and explained that someone was somehow live streaming from inside of his home. The dispatcher asked, whether anyone had threatened him in the past, or, and they assured him that officers were on the way. And Tyler immediately left work and began to drive home. And he kept the live stream open, so whoever was filming never hurried or anything. They never acted nervous or jittery. They simply wandered through the house as if they belonged there. And at one point, the camera stopped directly in front of the hallway mirror, and Tyler thought finally that he was going to see who's possibly doing this. Instead, the phone tilted downward just enough to avoid showing anyone's reflection. And it was almost as though whoever was holding it already knew exactly where the mirror was. And that's when Tyler realized something that frightened him even more than the break-in itself. This wasn't random. Whoever was inside that house knew the layout pretty well to just be moving about the way that they were. So by the time that Tyler reached his neighborhood, police cars were already outside. The front door was still locked, and there were no signs of forced entry or anything. Officers searched every room, every closet, the attic, and the garage, and there was nobody there. And then without warning, the live stream ended. Inside, everything looked completely normal. There was nothing that had been stolen, nothing had been damaged, but sitting on the kitchen counter was a half-empty bottle of water, and it was the same water that Tyler had just watched someone drink on the live stream. So police collected fingerprints, or as best whatever they could. Most belonged to Tyler, and the others were too badly smudged to identify. And he hoped that that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. because over the next week, small things around his house began changing. Kitchen chairs were slightly out of place. The bathroom cabinet would be left open when he knew that he shut it. His bedroom door, which he always closed before leaving for work, would be cracked open when he got home. One morning he woke up to find his television already on. And Tyler convinced himself that he was simply exhausted and forgetting things. But then Friday night happened, and he had fallen asleep on the couch when his phone vibrated around 2 a.m. And it was another Instagram notification from that same account. I'm actually getting chills just talking about this. He opened it and it was another live stream. And this time the camera wasn't showing his living room. It was showing him sleeping, and the phone appeared to be only a few feet away from him. Tyler shot awake, grabbed the knife next to his bed, and the live stream instantly ended. He searched every room in the house with his baseball bat and his knife. Every door was locked, every window was shut, and there was nobody there. Yet his phone still displayed one chilling message, and it just said, "Live has ended." After that, the police took the case much more seriously. Crime scene investigators searched crawl spaces, air vents, attic installation. I mean, they went above and beyond. They found absolutely nothing. So weeks had passed, and eventually Tyler convinced himself whatever had happened was hopefully finally over. Then his dog started acting really strange, and every night at exactly like 2:33 in the morning, his dog would wake up, walk into the hallway, stop, and stare upward. And it never barked, it never growled, it simply just stood there staring at something that Tyler could not see. So finally, Tyler decided to record the hallway overnight using his own phone. And the next morning, he reviewed the footage. Everything appeared completely normal until around 2:33 in the morning. His dog wandered into the frame, stopped, and looked toward the hallway, and then the camera suddenly lost focus for nearly 20 seconds, he said. And when this image finally became clear, the dog was now gone. Standing at the end of the hallway, barely distinguishable from this darkness, was what looked like a tall man, a figure of a man. It didn't move. It simply just stood there. So Tyler told me he replayed that clip dozens of times, and every viewing seemed different. It's like he's catching more and more each time. Sometimes the figure looks closer. Other times it appears more, further away. Sometimes it's almost like it just disappeared and appeared entirely. So police, they took the footage. They're obviously reviewing it. Now, eventually, Tyler gave up on the house altogether. He ended up moving out to another apartment that's in his city, closer to his job. But this is still a very active, ongoing investigation, and it's been going on for the past couple of months. Nothing has happened yet in this new apartment, thankfully. But just a couple of weeks ago, what prompted him to message me was he got another message from that Instagram account or whatever, and they were live streaming from his old house still. And they just said, you left something behind. That was the message on the live stream. And he didn't respond to it. Again, he reported it to the police department, and it's still an ongoing investigation. But yeah, this happened in Northern California. So let me know what you guys think.
I saw my deceased mom while I was getting an operation. If you want to listen to the story in Spanish, it is coming from Terror en Palabras, and it is called Vi a mi madre muerta mientras me operaban. So this lady says that on December 31st, she had to go in and get an operation. It wasn't going to be like super complicated operation, but she explains that she was still nervous. I mean, like anything else, you would probably be nervous if you're going to be put under and had to get a procedure done. She remembers laying there, seeing all these lights above her, and that the doctor comes in and says, hey, we're gonna go ahead and start. You're gonna feel a bit sleepy. I'm gonna count to 10 and you could just go ahead and go to sleep. She explains how she didn't even get to 5 when she was already falling asleep, but what happens after this was really strange. She started to feel this sensation like she was awake but also not awake. She didn't feel like she was in the hospital anymore. And that is when she sees her. She sees that next to her is her mom, who had passed away that same year in May. That the mother's death was really, hard. It was heartbreaking for the entire entire family. And for whatever reason, when she did see her mom standing next to her, it was like a mixture of sadness, but also a lot of fear. She said it didn't feel like a dream. It didn't feel like she was hallucinating. She sees her mom next to her, and she said that her mom looked really calm. She remembers her mom looking at her almost like when you're looking at somebody that you love so much. The thing is that when she sees her mom, obviously knowing that their mom is deceased, she immediately gets panicked. She thinks, oh my god, I think I might die. Like, my mom's here to get me. What if she's here because I'm about to die from this operation? Because of this, she tells her mom the first thing that popped into her brain, which was, vete, vete, no me quiero morir, vete. Translation in English, leave, leave. I don't want to die right now. Go away. She says that her mom didn't say anything, but started like disappearing. Like, she wasn't moving, she wasn't going, she just like was disappearing right in front of her face. She thought everything was over, you know, I'm not gonna die today. However, she says that then her mom appeared again to the other side of her, but this time she was not alone. She was with her grandmother, so the mom's mom. They were both right there next to her. She explains that they were both buried right next to each other, but again, when she sees both of them there, she got even more scared. She starts screaming at them, leave, leave, I'm not ready to die yet. She said that she kept repeating that over and over again, and by the time she knew it, she had opened her eyes, she was in the room, and she had woken up from already had gotten the surgery. She said that she looks around, she's alone in the room, she could barely hear people in the hallway, but she could hear the machines, and that's when she turns to look at her blood pressure monitor. She notices that it says her blood pressure was at 140/110. When she sees that, she explains that she doesn't know why, but she started to feel that same fear and like anguish that she had been feeling when she had seen her mom and grandmother. And because she felt the same way, she started to say it again. Please leave, leave, I don't want to die, I'm not ready to die, please leave. In that very moment when she's screaming out into the air this time because she didn't see her mom and grandmother, she says that the following strange thing happened. She saw when the blood pressure, the monitor started going into numbers that were more normal, and she just didn't understand what was happening. Moments later, a nurse comes in and he asks her, is everything okay? And she tells him yes. He turns to look at the blood pressure monitor and he said out loud, that's so weird, I could have sworn that I saw a high alert on this monitor not too long ago. But in that very moment, the numbers were completely normal. A few hours later, they finally put her in a room and her brother was there, and that's when a nurse comes in to see if everything was okay. That was also when another thing happened that just kept her again thinking about what was happening. The nurse was wearing this perfume that caused the brother to ask the nurse what perfume she was wearing because it smelled really nice. That's when she looks at her brother and she's like, of course you like that scent, how can you not like it? That's the perfume that our mom would wear every single day. The nurse does end up telling them the perfume that she's wearing, and it's the same perfume that their mother would wear when she was alive. After this, she started to think about everything, like every single thing that happened that day, down to the perfume that was just so strange. What she saw when she was put under, what she told her mom and her grandmother, the nurse's perfume, the machine with the blood pressure. She doesn't know if everything was just like a dream that was caused because of the anesthesia. She doesn't know if maybe she was so scared and nervous about the operation that she was just thinking about the people that she loved the most, or if her mom and her grandmother were really there with her while she was getting that operation done. The only thing that she does feel with like all of her gut is that when she was telling them to please let her stay a little bit longer, she doesn't want to die, like leave her alone, that they actually listened to her and that she knew she was gonna get to live longer. But what do you guys think?
The scariest Christmas I ever had, 2001, story time. My best friend Brittany was spending the night with me, and we had already done Christmas earlier that day. Now, in North Carolina, it's typically not cold on Christmas unless we get lucky that year, and on that Christmas, it was really warm. Now, me and Brittany used to have a habit of sneaking out the house late at night and walking down the road, going in the woods, just doing stuff we shouldn't have been doing. We were just dumb teenagers that were really nosy, and we were always plundering in these old houses for some reason. I don't know what that's about. So that night, me and Brittany sneak out around 11:30. We climb out my bedroom window, and I'll never forget it because this was the night when I fell out my bedroom window and hit the tongue of the trailer with my back. When I hit that tongue, it shook the whole trailer. It went dong, damn near paralyzed me. I laid on the ground, couldn't move, stiff, like she had to wait a good 15 minutes before she could pick me up, and I walked off. It left a huge bruise on my back. So beside my house, we had a huge field. Then there was a bunch of woods, like real thick woods behind this field. There was this old wood house out there in the woods, like pretty good ways away, and we decided to take our flashlights and go out there and plunder through it. I'd been in this wood house before, so I knew the outlay of it. We're walking through this old house, looking through the paperwork, the drawers, the bedrooms, just, plundering around, being nosy. We sit on this old green 70s style couch, still had the plastic on it, just sitting there chilling, and I happened to have a doobie in my pocket. So I pulled that out, lit it up, and I'm just sitting there talking to her because she didn't smoke, and we start to see these little lights flashing through the window. Of course, I thought it was my parents, so I immediately outed that thing, and we hid down behind the window so nobody couldn't see us. And we look up through the window, and we can see there's like 15, 20 people walking by. These people were all wearing these blood red hooded gowns. They looked like Klan suits, but they weren't Klan suits, and they were moving so fast. Once they were going out of our sight, I told Brittany, we need to get the hell out of here. We got to get back home. So we start creeping out the house, and right then we see the group standing in the edge of the woods talking. So we creep back around the edge of the house and just hid around the corner where we could still see them, but also run away. I don't know what those people were doing out there, but we lived in the deep south, so there's no damn telling what they were doing. It was some of the weirdest stuff I'd ever seen. We heard them say, like, for example, Chris of blank, you are now anointed as blank position. And then the guy pulls out this big ass sword and just places it on each side of his shoulders and then on his forehead, anointing him like a knight. Like, where are we, in medieval times? What are they doing? I almost thought it was fake because of how cliche this looked. It was like they took it straight out of a TV show. But then we saw the guy who was being initiated remove his whole gown. He had on no clothes except for drawers, like underwear, took the sword and started cutting on his chest. That's when I heard Brittany sitting beside me go, oh my God. All these people just stop and turn around. So we took off running. We ran for a good 30 minutes and we could hear them running behind us. And I told Brittany, I was like, do not stop. Because me and Brittany done been through this before. She sucked at running. Poor Brittany had diabetes and she could not run worth a damn. I was always having to grab her by the arm and drag her out of whatever crazy situation we got ourselves into. We finally make it back home, and when we climb up into my window, I can see these people's flashlights coming through the field up next to our house. Brittany said, oh my God, they're gonna come up here. They're gonna get your parents. I said, let them wake my parents up, because my dad ain't one to be with. Because if my dad comes out this house, he's going to be spraying bullets. You just don't know. But they didn't bother our family. They just walked on out to the field and continued doing whatever they were doing. Brittany and I went through a lot of crazy situations like this. We were always together. We were best friends, and I lost her when she was 23. I miss her so much, and I wish she was here to tell the stories with me.
My coworker can read minds. This story was submitted by someone we'll call Layla, and she says while she's not a conspiracy theorist, she doesn't discredit the possibility that hidden abilities like mind reading can exist. And so I'm posting this more for discussion. I love the hidden ability stories, and I want to know what you all think. If you think this is possible, or if you all think this is just a crazy, crazy coincidence. But Layla says she works as a surgical technologist, which basically means she has to scrub into surgeries like surgeons do, but she's not a surgeon. She just hands instruments to surgeons, and with that comes the responsibility of having to know and anticipate the next move by the surgeon. Obviously, it's a job that requires intense focus and a lot of responsibility, and because of this, she says she doesn't talk much during surgeries, and she's just sort of hyper-focused, like she gets tunnel vision. While in surgery, everything else just drowns out around her. So last week, she was in surgery. They were doing a shoulder scope, and the surgeon had just finished shaving down the shoulder and was sort of looking around inside, which she said can take a long time, depending on the surgeon and patient. But in the room was the surgeon, the surgical technologist, so her, the CRNA, who puts the patient to sleep and then wakes them up, and then also the circulating nurse. But during the surgery, the CRNA had just been switched out for lunch. This other CRNA was switched in, this guy that she calls Ted. And she had worked with Ted before. He seems like a normal, everyday guy. He's got a family. He talks about sports, but she didn't know him that well. Anyway, while the surgeon is cleaning out the inside of the shoulder, she's just having these lingering thoughts because it's taking a while. And then she has this thought and she sort of thinks to herself, oh my God, I hope no one in here can read my mind. And in her head, she says, if anyone in here can read my mind, cough. And she's like, I don't even know what possessed me to say that inside of my head, but I did. As she's having that thought, like actively, Ted coughs. Of course, immediately she's like, okay, that was really, really weird. But that was just a coincidence. Then because that happened, she's like, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to test it more. She says, if you can hear me, tap your foot twice. And as she's having that thought, Ted taps his foot twice. She's like, holy crap, that was extra weird, but also that had to be a coincidence. But she checks on the patient. Everything is stable. Everything is going good. The surgeon is still cleaning up the inside of the shoulder. At this point, she decides to get very specific in her head because the patient was stable and he didn't need anything. So she says, Ted, close the med drawer. Now, mind you, Ted had been standing still. The patient did not need anything. All of the meds that they needed were already out. Ted stops what he's doing, walks over to the drawer, pulls it open a little farther, and then closes it. And Ted looks at her. But at this point, the surgeon needs something, and so she goes back to work mode and she finishes what she's doing. And then by the time the surgeon's done with that task, the CRNA is switched out and the original one comes back from lunch. She says, I want to think this is all a big coincidence, but after 3 specific tasks that he did, as I said them in my head, I can't help but wonder if he had something else going on. But she did say that she wants to emphasize the fact that he's a normal guy. He talks about his wife, his family, his kids, and the occasional football player who he thinks is going to change a team. There's nothing about this guy that would make you look at him and think, yeah, he dabbles in something that would make this possible. That this just happened last week, so she's not worked with Ted again to test this theory out again to see if it happens or if it was just a coincidence. But she did also say that she wonders if, because she was so hyper focused in that moment, if that is what made it possible for this to occur. Like maybe it wasn't Ted at all. Maybe it was just her energy that made her more susceptible to sending out signals. Maybe his energy was so focused that it made it possible for him to hear them. Their names have been changed due to the nature of their work, but she'll be seeing the comments. Let her know your thoughts. I think this one's very curious. If you have a story that you think no one else would believe, or something that happened that just makes you wonder, like, what's really going on, please send it in. We would love to hear it. We love to theorize over here.
The person that sent me the story called it, I still don't know what she saw. By the way, if you have a story that you'd like to share with our glitch community about glitches in the Matrix, dreams, aliens, cryptids, or the paranormal, you can send it to this email address. And remember, we believe you. Hi, Auntie. Hi. My name is Reese. I recently discovered your TikTok and have been absolutely loving all your creepy stories. I wanted to take a second and share one of my own with you. I hope you enjoy it. Woo! People always ask me if I believe in ghosts, and I never truly know how to answer. All I know is that when I was 15, my dad and I moved into a trailer on the edge of town so I could attend a specific high school in that district. My dad worked long hours as the general manager of an RV park, which meant that he would not get home most nights until about midnight, which left me alone quite a bit. From the day we moved in, that trailer never felt like home. It wasn't the temporary fear that you feel after watching a scary movie. It was a constant weight. The air felt heavy, like I wasn't supposed to be there, and every room felt darker than it should have, no matter how many lights were on. At first, I tried to convince myself I just wasn't used to the place, but then the footsteps started. Heavy and slow, like someone wearing combat boots was trying to sneak up on someone. Almost every night, I'd hear the same slow footsteps walking down the hallway while I was completely alone. I'd freeze and listen, waiting for my dad to walk into the room, but he never did. I'd always peek out of the door only to see his side of the house was still dark and he was still at work. I tried to blame it on the trailer settling, but footsteps don't just happen. Sometimes I'd also hear people talking, which I blamed on the TV left on or voices carrying from outside. I kept trying to find reasons not to be scared, until one night. I had broken the blinds covering my bedroom window, and since we couldn't afford new ones until payday, I had pinned up a blanket instead. I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard 3 quiet taps on my window. I froze. My bedroom window was about 7 or 8 feet off the ground, with no trees or bushes nearby that could have reached the glass. I stared at the blanket for what felt like forever, too scared to look outside, until exhaustion finally won. A few minutes after falling asleep, I had the most vivid dream of my life. The blanket was pushed back for some reason, and outside my window was one enormous greenish yellow eye. No face, no body, just a giant eye staring directly at me. It didn't blink or move, it just watched. I woke up screaming. Even after that, I realized I was awake. The trailer felt wrong. The air felt thick and almost angry. I sat up in my room with every light on until my dad got home around midnight. When I told him, he smiled and said I'd probably been watching too many scary videos before bed. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, it didn't feel like a nightmare. After that, little things kept happening. My Roku TV would randomly turn itself on in the middle of the night, or I'd wake up to find it completely turned off instead of showing a screensaver. Figurines would fall off my bookshelf, pictures on the wall would end up on the floor, and I'd lose things that should have been impossible to lose. One day, my umbrella disappeared. My dad and I searched everywhere for it. Weeks passed, and eventually we accepted that it was gone. About a month later, I was cleaning my room and found it, only now there were 2. They weren't just similar, they were identical. Same color, same size, same little rips in the fabric, and the exact same scratches on the handle. Every tiny detail matched, as if the umbrella had duplicated itself. I still can't explain it. The longer I lived there, the worse my anxiety became, and panic attacks became normal. I constantly felt like someone was watching me, even when I knew that I was alone. I got so uncomfortable at one point I tried to sage the house, which only made it worse. Something happened to this day that I cannot explain. My best friend at the time spent the night. She knew I always felt uncomfortable in the trailer, but she had never experienced anything herself until that night. We were making popcorn in the kitchen when I realized that I had forgotten something in my dad's bedroom, and I asked her to grab it for me. She walked down the hallway without thinking twice, but only a few seconds later, she let out a terrified scream. I dropped everything and ran. She was sitting on the floor outside my dad's bedroom, crying so hard she could barely breathe. When she could finally speak, she pointed into the bedroom and she said, "There was someone standing in the corner." I looked inside, turned on every light, checked behind every door, inside the closets, under the bed, and in every room in the trailer, and there was no one. She just kept shaking her head and whispered, "It wasn't a real person. It looked like a shadow of a man just standing there watching me." She refused to go back into that room, and I could tell by how shaken she was that she wasn't joking. I called my dad, and the second he heard how terrified we were, he left work and drove home. He came through the front door carrying a baseball bat and searched every inch of the trailer, the closets, the outside, and the underneath, and he found nothing. No broken windows, no unlocked doors, no sign that anyone had even been there. My friend never changed her story, and years later, she still insisted she saw someone standing in that corner. Maybe there are logical explanations for everything that happened. Maybe the footsteps were just old floors, the voices came from another house, the dream was just a dream, the TV was malfunctioning, and my friend imagined what she saw. But I've lived in other houses since then. I've watched scary movies, had nightmares, and been home alone countless times, and I've never felt anything like I felt inside that trailer. But I can say one thing. After living there for 3 years, I learned something. The scariest part isn't knowing that something is in your house. It's never knowing for sure whether there actually was. The end. Oh my God, this was a good story. We had a glitch in the Matrix and paranormal stuff all in the same story. Like, how come in the middle of this paranormal experience story, you're also having a duplicate umbrella just pop up? That says to me that potentially there was some like portal activity happening in your house. Like maybe in that trailer, there was some kind of portals that were letting in the entities that you were hearing walking around, the weird eye dream that you had, the thing that your friend saw, maybe those were like coming in and out of the portal. Maybe your umbrella somehow left the portal, came back with another one came back with it. That's what I'm going. I'm going that trailer was definitely, some shit was going down. That wasn't all just coincidence. I'm sorry, I don't believe coincidence at all. That all shit was happening. But I think I'm saying there was a portal in there and shit was coming in and out. Maybe you need to close the portal. Maybe that's why the sage didn't work, because the portal was still open. So, I mean, maybe the sage just like, I don't know. I know that sometimes saging can make stuff worse. I'm not sure if it's in the way that you do it or what you say or what you use. But I know that it is a thing. But I'm going to say that there is a portal in that. That is what I'm going with. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. And thank you so much for sharing.
What would you do if you saw this standing outside your door in the middle of the night? A ton of people over the years have had that very encounter. Black-eyed children are paranormal beings which resemble children, but something is off about them. Their eyes are completely black. They don't have pupils and there's no white to their eyes. It is solid black. And while that's already terrifying on its own, what makes it even worse is that every time somebody witnesses a black-eyed child, it will insist that that person lets them into their space, whether it be their car or their house or their place of work. And no matter how many times you say no, no matter how many times you try to shut it down and get away from them, they will become more and more insistent. But despite how insistent they are, apparently they respect the word no, and they won't enter your space if you don't give them permission. Like I said, a lot of people have come across black-eyed children, and these are just a few of those encounters. This first encounter can be traced back to Brian Bethel, who was a journalist living in Abilene, Texas. According to Bethel, this encounter happened in 1996. He said he was sitting in his car outside of a movie theater in Abilene at around 9:30 p.m. He was writing a check to pay a bill when two boys approached his driver's side window. These boys were supposedly around 9 to 12 years old, and they were wearing hooded sweatshirts. At first, they simply asked him for a ride, and they claimed that they needed to go to their mother's house to get money so that they could go see a movie. But Bethel began feeling extremely uncomfortable, and he eventually noticed that the movie they were supposedly wanting to see had already started. And then he looked at their eyes, and they were completely black. According to his account, the boys became increasingly insistent that he let them into his car. And at some point, one of the boys turned to him and said, "We can't come in unless you tell us that it's okay." Bethel panicked and he drove away. And when he turned back to see if they were still there, they were gone. Later on, Brian Bethel would claim that one of his friends named John Northwood had a similar experience with black-eyed children. John Northwood's encounter took place in Portland, Oregon around 11 at night. According to him, he had just finished up a seminar in downtown Portland. He had gotten into his car, started the engine, when all of a sudden, somebody tapped on his window.
He looked over and it was one of the men from the seminar, and he looked terrified, and he asked him for a ride. He then proceeded to tell John that he was scared because there was these weird people standing outside of his own car. John agreed to help him, and they drove over to where this man's car would have been, and there was 2 boys and a girl. These children see them in the car and they approach, and they proceed to ask John for a ride because they're scared. At this point, the man in John's car is terrified and he's saying, "No, don't let them in, don't let them in," and he's unlocking the door to get out of the car. John tells him to stay exactly where he is. He looks back at the children standing outside of his car, and all of their eyes are completely black. John's instincts take over. He throws the car into reverse and they get out of there. And as the man inside of John's car looks in the rearview mirror, he sees the 3 kids running at full speed after the car. They do eventually lose them, and then a few hours later, John drives the man back to where his car was so that he could go home, and he agrees to drive closely behind him. And this is where the story gets a lot darker. The man was driving through an intersection when a truck came out of nowhere and hit him, and he passed away instantly. John can't prove that these children had anything to do with that man's passing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the 2 events were somehow connected, and he never forgot the way that their eyes looked. And this 3rd encounter really hits different because there is a photo. In August of 2017, a Reddit user named Fat and Depressed was receiving multiple alerts to his phone that something was triggering the motion sensor on his doorbell camera. He checked the alerts because they were going off back to back, and what he saw absolutely shook him. The camera showed what appeared to be a black-eyed child standing at his door. According to the user, he did not open the door, he hid upstairs, and the visitor never returned. The user then said, "Yes, this was real. Basically, I kept getting notifications on my app that my doorbell detected a visitor. Yet when I checked the first few times, nothing appeared, and figured it was maybe a stray dog or someone on the sidewalk being detected by the sensor. Several notifications later, I checked again, and this is what appeared. Yes, I'm alive." Whether you want to believe this encounter or not is entirely up to you. But with all 3 of these encounters, we can't deny that they are incredibly creepy. As always, let me know what you think. Do you think that black-eyed children actually exist? Or worse, have you encountered one yourself?
What's up with it? What's up with it? What's up with it? I'm back with another video. And the video I'm doing today is kind of different. You know, I'm just sitting in the tub relaxing. I think I want to do me a video about one of my experiences as being a nurse. I've been a nurse for over 4 years. Started off on med-surg, went to ICU, CVU, and back on med-surg. So I think this experience was when I first became a nurse. And mind you, when you are, the hospital I was at, you have a maximum of 7 patients in the hospital. Cool. But we were short we call them PCTs. We were short some PCTs, some techs in the hospital. So somebody needed somebody to sit with them. So, okay, I'm tired anyway. I volunteer to go sit with the patient, right? Right. I'm sitting with them, just sitting. They turn the TV out to go to sleep. Okay, cool. It's pitch black in there. Probably like close to 1 o'clock in the morning now. I'm getting tired. I ain't gonna lie to you. I'm getting tired. So, I doze off. When I say pitch black, I mean the blinds are closed, curtains are closed, door is closed, lights off. There's not a source of light coming from nowhere, not even on the phone. I doze off probably like 30, 45 minutes. I wake up, I kid you not, by the patient's bed. My lash coming off. By my patient's bed, it's like a mist, a fog, a mist of light. I don't know what it was, but it was forming right beside my patient's bed. Like it was in a ball at first, but it was like forming into something. Back when I tell you, I hauled ass out of there. I don't give a fuck if they need a sitter or not, bitch. Get somebody else in here ASAP. I mean that. I don't play with no supernatural. I don't play with no paranormal, none of that. Get me the fuck up out of here. Put me back as a nurse. Fuck being a tech. You hear me? I hauled ass up out of there so fucking fast. I didn't even know what to tell they ass. I just said, I'm tired. If I sit here any longer, I'm going to go to sleep. They switched me back to being a nurse instead of sitting. Baby, when I tell you, I was so scared. I ain't never seen no shit like that.
Two women broke down on an empty highway in the middle of nowhere, and as they walked back to their car carrying a can of gas, they began hearing these inhuman screams coming from the woods on both sides of the road. But the screaming wasn't the worst part, because once they finally got the car running and they began driving away, something massive had emerged from the darkness and started to keep pace with them, and they were going about 40 miles an hour. So this story was sent to me by a woman who said it happened to her and one of her closest friends while they were traveling through the Midwest. And before I get into it, obviously I have no way to verify any of this, so take this story for what it is and decide for yourselves. So this happened several years ago, and she and her best friend decided to take a road trip through the Midwest. They had been driving for most of the day at this point, deliberately taking smaller highways instead of staying on, the interstate. They wanted to take the scenic route. And at first, it was very peaceful. They passed long stretches of farmland, tiny towns that appeared, and disappeared within minutes, and old barns sitting hundreds of yards from the road that have probably been there for about 200 years. And as the evening approached, the towns became farther and farther apart. Eventually, they found themselves on a narrow 2-lane road surrounded by open fields and patches of dense woods. There were no streetlights, no houses that they could see, and as far as they knew, they were the only ones on the road at this point. They haven't passed another vehicle for what seemed maybe about 2 hours, she said. And that was when the car began sputtering. It was an older vehicle. Her friend looked down at the dashboard and realized that they were almost completely out of gas. The car rolled another 100 yards before finally the engine, it just stopped. And it was leaving them stranded on the shoulder of pretty much an empty road. There was nothing in sight. They checked their phones, but there was almost no service to call for AAA or anything. And according to her, this was the kind of place where the silence suddenly felt enormous the moment that the engine shut off. Luckily, they remembered passing a small gas station about a mile or two back, and neither woman wanted to leave the car, but they didn't really have many options at that point. So they locked the doors, they grabbed their phones, and they began walking. And the trip to the gas station took longer than they had expected. And by the time that they, bought a small gas can from there, they filled it and they started walking back, daylight absolutely had disappeared pretty much at this point. There was still a little bit of light out to see the road ahead of them, but the fields had become very, very dark. And the spaces between the trees looked almost completely black. And they had been walking for about several minutes when they began hearing noises on either side of the road, and that's when they heard their first scream. It came from somewhere deep inside of the woods on their left side, and at first it sounded like a person screaming in pain. Both women stopped and they listened for a second, wondering whether someone nearby actually needed help. And then the sound changed from that being in pain sound to something grew deeper, and it was rougher and stretching into something that neither woman could identify. It sounded partly human and partly animal, and far too powerful to have come from an ordinary person. And they said it lasted like several seconds before abruptly cutting off. And her friend eventually whispered that it was probably a mountain lion or some other animal. And neither of them completely believed that, but it was enough to get them moving again and to take their mind off of it. So they walked a little faster, staying close together, and they repeatedly, were glancing toward the woods and checking behind them. But less than a minute later, another scream erupted from the opposite side of the road now, and this one was even closer than the first one. It seemed to begin somewhere in the field before moving toward the tree line. So the sound was so loud that they could actually feel it vibrating in their chests. And the woman carrying the gas can, she said she nearly dropped it because of how sudden it was and how much it scared her. And what frightened them most was how quickly the scream seemed to change locations, like it was moving. One moment the sound came from deep within the woods on their left, and seconds later it came from the fields right on the edge of the fields on their right. And it gave them the impression that either more than one of whatever this was out there, or one creature, whatever, was moving incredibly fast on either side of them. So they stopped talking and they began running as quick as they could to get back to the car. And every few seconds they heard something disturbing the tall grass beside them on the road. It wasn't a continuous sound. It would move for several seconds and then stop when they stopped, and then begin once they started walking or running again. And eventually they saw their car in the distance and they just hauled it. So the moment they reached it, the one woman unlocked the doors while the other one removed the cap from the gas tank, and her friend poured the fuel in as quickly as possible. She spilled some of it down the side of her car because her hands were shaking so bad. Then another scream came from the woods directly behind them. This one sounded very close enough that neither woman bothered even looking toward it. They dropped the gas can right there. They climbed inside the vehicle and they locked the doors. So her friend turned the key once, but nothing happened. She tried again, nothing happened. And finally, around the third try, it started to go a little bit, but then it died, and they were hearing heavy movement on either side of the grass. And finally, they got it started. So her friend shifted into drive and accelerated so hard that the tires briefly spun out on the gravel against, on the shoulder, and they just took off. The passenger looked back and saw the tall grass moving violently near the place where their car had just been parked. And at first, nothing emerged. And then something enormous stepped out of the field and onto the shoulder where they just were. And she couldn't clearly see it. She was looking in her side mirror back at it. It was completely dark, she said. And she said all she saw was a massive black silhouette standing upright beside the pavement. And it looked unusually tall and very broad shoulders with arms that seemed to just hang all the way down to its feet is what she said it looked like. And then it leaned forward in this like crunching way, and it just took off at them. The passenger screamed at her friend to drive faster, and her friend was already doing nearly 40 miles an hour. But the figure was moving alongside them through the field, keeping pace with the car with ease. And at first, the passenger thought the darkness was creating an illusion, a shadow or something like that. And she convinced herself they were passing different trees or fence posts that only appeared to be moving with them. Which is possible, but every time that they crossed a section of open field, she saw that same shape sprinting beside them. And it wasn't running like a normal person, she said. Its upper body remained strangely low while its arms swung in this long, powerful, motionless, it was very weird. And at times it appeared to be running on two legs, and at other times it dropped onto all fours and just was taken off. And the way she was struggling to describe it because her mind couldn't make up. So her friend increased their speed to nearly 50 miles an hour, and the creature continued matching them. And for several seconds, it disappeared behind a row of trees. The passenger hoped that they had finally, outrun it, but then it emerged into another open field closer to the road than before. And that was when it screamed again. And the sound was so loud that it seemed to come from directly outside of the car. Both women instinctively ducked, and the driver briefly swerved into the opposite lane to avoid what they thought was right there. And the passenger looked back toward the field and saw the figure raise what looked like one of its arms, and a second later something came flying out of the darkness, and it was this massive rock that struck the passenger side window with enough force to shatter it instantly. Glass exploded across the seat and into the passenger's hair. The rock landed between the two women near the center console, and she described it as being roughly the size of a softball and covered in damp soil. The passenger covered her face while her friend struggled to keep the car on the road, and they just took off. There was nothing that they could do at this point except just try to go and get out of there as fast as they can. Her friend pushed the car even faster. The passenger turned around to look through the shattered window, expecting to see the figure still chasing them, but instead it stopped. And in the faint red glow of the taillights, she saw the shape, whatever this was, just standing there, watching them, completely still. So they finally made it to a gas station. They got out, they took a few pics, which I did show on here, and to this day she has no idea what that was or what it could have been. Like I said, they were somewhere in the Midwest, Bigfoot maybe, something else, I don't know. But if you guys are from that area, or if you've ever experienced anything like this, let me know in the comments what you think it is.
Whatever you do, do not watch this movie at night. Am I the only one that was obsessed with Resident Evil movies when I was younger? Because guys, I would watch these all the time with my dad, and it was my big obsession. Resident Evil The Extinction was literally my favorite from all the franchise. This one hit a little different. The movie came out in 2007 and honestly, it has to be for me the most unsettling one from all the other movies. I mean, this one is just way different. Instead of keeping everything inside a dark lab with a bunch of scientific-y things, this one is actually outside in the dry lands like a desert. And weirdly, that makes it scary because if you think about it, you're literally just in the dry lands with zombies everywhere. You're not undercover like in a building. And the zombies in this ones, the infected ones, absolutely not. In this movie, they seem more aggressive. There's just something about seeing zombies in broad daylight that doesn't sit right with me because almost all the movies, well, yeah, almost all the movies are like, they show the zombies at night, but this one's like the daylight. But one of my favorite things about Extinction is the atmosphere. It has like the 2000s horror vibe, and honestly, I dig the older horror movies. The washed out colors is what really drives my attention because nowadays everything is just bright, super dark, super weird, but this one is just perfect. And I know many people are like, oh my god, those movies are not scary, blah blah blah. They may have not been scary, but if you watched them when you were younger and you were obsessed with these, they were, you know, pretty scary. And let's talk about Project Alice. Milla Jovovich is literally my favorite actress because of these movies. She played Alice so well. I was literally obsessed with her. So let me know in the comments what do you guys think about these movies. Did you think they were scary? I mean, now I don't think they're as scary, but they are very entertaining.
There was this girl named Emily, and Emily said when she was younger, she lived in Michigan on this farm. And she said it was right next to the Manistee National Forest. And she remembers one specific time when her father was outside late working on the farm. She was inside with her mother. And she said all of a sudden her father come running in the house and he was panicked and he was scared. And she said he went right into the bedroom, he grabbed his firearm, and he told everyone, get in the hallway and crouch down. Now they're scared because they don't know what's going on. And Emily and her mother and stuff were asking her father like, hey, you know, what's going on? What's wrong? And she said her father just kept saying, be quiet, don't talk, be quiet, just duck down, don't talk. And she said that's when they heard what sounded like footsteps up on the roof of the house. And she said it was just these loud crashing footsteps, like something large was walking on top of the house. And she said her dad, you know, just clutched the firearm and was shaking this whole time. She said for the next 10 or 15 minutes, they could hear stuff walking around on the roof. And they would hear these loud howls coming from outside. And she said just as it started, boom, it was quiet and whatever it was gone. And she said her father, you know, that whole night was just on edge and was terrified of something. She tried to ask her father, you know, what was that? What happened? And she said her father wouldn't speak about it and said, don't worry about it. It's nothing. The next couple of months, she said the people around town, they were all talking about this large, hairy man. And she said around the farm, there were these strange footprints, very large footprints. And she said on a regular basis, livestock was coming up missing. And she had lost several goats and chickens. And she really had no idea at the time what was going on. Well, she said after a while, you know, everyone kind of stopped talking about it and she forgot. Well, she said her father one night told her and her sister, I need you to go out to the barn and check on the animals. So her and her sister went outside of the house. They walk over to the barn and they open the door. They go inside, you know, and it's pitch black. And she starts reaching around for this pull string light. All of a sudden, as she's reaching for the light, she grabs something. And she said it was just this thick, matted fur. And at the time, she thought maybe this was a farm animal. And she said, like, what could be this big? And she said it was just very muscular. And that's when she looked up and she said she's seen two red eyes staring down at her. And so she screams, her and her sister run out of the barn, they go inside, and she tells her father runs out with a firearm, searches the barn, doesn't find anything. She said the next day, they went outside, the barn door was ripped off, and not only that, 3 of the goats in that barn were missing.
I work for a construction site. We're currently working on a very long project, and over the weekend, the site manager took some photos of the progress before he went home. When he was looking at the photos on his laptop, he was pretty freaked out to see a hooded figure in the room that we're working on. He was alone in the building when he was taking the photos, and he didn't see the figure until way later. The building is on the site of a Victorian jail, which has since been demolished. The figure kind of looks like an executioner. I took this photo at Antoine's restaurant in New Orleans. My husband says that it's probably nothing, but I feel like you can clearly see the shape of a person. There was obviously nobody walking in front of me. This is a photo from our family house that we believe had a ghost or a dark energy. No one was behind them in the photo, but when we looked back at it, before it was even developed, we saw this figure and wrote it off. But looking back, we think it looks like a black ghost with legs, walking. When we lived there, we would all have the same reoccurring nightmares. We would constantly see a black figure hovering over us, and it would commonly wake up my mom by screaming in her ear and calling her name.
I got married and received so many beautiful gifts from my husband's family. But one of those gifts was the reason I couldn't keep a pregnancy. Story time. Let me call myself Amaka. That is not my real name. When I met my husband, we fell in love and eventually got married. After our wedding, his family from the village came to visit us with so many gifts. They brought wrappers, beads, bracelets, traditional clothes, and different things that they said were gifts from members of the family. I was actually very happy. I appreciated everything because these were people I was now married into, and I wanted to have a good relationship with them. There was one particular auntie who sent a gift through someone because she couldn't come herself. I didn't think anything of it. I accepted everything and kept them in the house. But after our marriage, something became very difficult for me. I couldn't have children. At first, my husband and I didn't worry too much. We thought it would happen naturally. But then I got pregnant. I was so happy, only for me to have a miscarriage. We tried again. I got pregnant again. And I lost that pregnancy too. This kept happening. Miscarriage upon miscarriage. After some time, it became emotionally exhausting. Rami, my husband also started becoming frustrated. He wanted children badly. And every time I lost the pregnancy, it created another problem between us. We went to hospitals. We tried different treatments. We did everything we could think of, but nothing changed. Then one day, something very strange happened. I was in a car with someone I had just met, and somehow we started talking about life. I don't even know how the conversation got there, but this person looked at me and told me something. He said there was something in my house that I needed to get rid of. He said whatever it was, I had to burn it. I asked him what he was talking about. He couldn't tell me exactly what the object was. He only told me that it had been brought into my home with a very bad intention. Honestly, I didn't believe him. I wasn't someone who believed every spiritual story people told. But when I got home, something just kept bothering me. I started thinking about all the things that had entered my house after my wedding. And then I remembered the gift. I started searching through them, the wrappers, the bracelets, the traditional clothes, everything that had been brought from my husband's family. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I just kept searching. Eventually, I decided to burn everything. I know it sounds strange, but at that point, I was very desperate. I had lost too many pregnancies, Rami. I didn't know what else to do. So I gathered the gifts and burned them. When my husband came home, I told him what I had done. He was very angry. He asked me why I would listen to a stranger and start burning gifts from his family. He told me that people were filling my head with nonsense. And honestly, I understood why he was angry. He was also tired. Years had passed, and we still didn't have a child. Our situation had already put a lot of pressure on our marriage, so I didn't argue with him. I just told him that I had done what I felt I needed to do. After that, I stopped accepting gifts from any of his family members anyhow. And whenever there was a family program in the village, I started avoiding it. I didn't want to go. He found problem with that. Some months later, something happened that I had almost forgotten how to feel about. I got pregnant. This time, I was terrified. I didn't want to celebrate. I was scared that I would lose the baby again. But the pregnancy continued. 1 month passed, then another. For the first time, I started believing that maybe this pregnancy would actually stay. Then one day, my husband received a phone call from someone in his family. I wasn't paying attention to their conversation, but after a while, I noticed his expression change. He became very quiet. He listened for a long time without saying much. Then he ended the call. He looked at me, and honestly, I knew exactly what that look meant. It was the kind of look that said, "You were right." He sat down and told me what he had just heard. The auntie who had sent one of the gifts had apparently confessed to doing many terrible things to people in the village. And according to what the family member told him, she had admitted that she had harmed several people too. She had even been accused of causing another family member to become impotent. There were so many things that had apparently happened over the years. And then my husband told me something again. The family had started realizing that this woman had been behind a lot of problems people had experienced, including mine. And suddenly, everything that had happened to me started making sense. The miscarriages, the strange advice I had received, the gift, the feeling that something was wrong in our house. I don't know what exactly happened spiritually, but I know that after those gifts were removed from my house, I eventually carried my pregnancy successfully. And today, I have my child. I decided to share this story because I learned something from what had happened to me. Please do not accept gifts from just anybody. And I'm not saying you should become afraid of everyone who gives you something. But accepting gifts when you are getting married, especially when you are entering into a family, you should be very careful. Or be in the comments. What do you guys think about this story? Kindly leave your thoughts in the comments, and she'll be there reading them. And don't forget to click the link in my bio and subscribe to my YouTube channel.
What would you do if you woke up in the middle of the night because your grandmother was calling your name from the basement, but she died 2 weeks ago? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about the night that something in our basement started using my grandma's voice. I was 16 when my grandma died, and we were extremely close. Even though everyone knows she was sick, it happened faster than any of us expected. About 2 weeks after the funeral, I woke up sometime in the middle of the night because I thought I heard someone talking downstairs. I stayed in bed for a second listening, and then I heard, "Honey?" I sat straight up. My grandma was the only person who called me that. Not just the word, but the way she said it. The same voice and the same little upward sound at the end. I remember staring at my bedroom door thinking there was absolutely no way I had actually heard that. And then it came again. "Honey, come downstairs." I started crying immediately, and I know that sounds weird because I was terrified, but I also missed her so much that for maybe 10 seconds I actually wanted to believe it was her. I got out of bed and my parents' room was down the hall. The stairs to the first floor was directly across from mine, and the second I opened my bedroom door, I could hear her more clearly. "Can you help me?" The voice was coming from downstairs. I took a few steps towards the staircase, and then I stopped. Our bedroom door was in the kitchen, and then suddenly I realized that was exactly where the voice was coming from. Not the living room or the front hallway. The basement. I whispered, "Grandma?" Immediately, "Yes." I backed away from the stairs, and something about the speed of that answer scared me more than anything else had. I went into my parents' room and shook my dad awake. He was barely conscious when I whispered, "Dad, I can hear Grandma downstairs." He looked at me like he thought I'd had a nightmare, and then the voice carried up from the first floor, "Honey?" My dad sat up, and he didn't ask me anything after that. He just listened. My mom woke up too, and then the voice said my dad's name, except it wasn't the same name everyone called him. It was his childhood nickname his mom used when he was little. I had heard it maybe once in my entire life. My dad got out of bed, and my mom grabbed his arm and asked where he was going. He said he just wanted to look downstairs. We all walked to the top of the staircase, and the house was completely dark. From there, we could see part of the kitchen. The basement door was closed, and my dad called out, "Mom?" For a few seconds, nothing happened, and then, "Come down here." My dad stopped moving, and she sounded normal, almost annoyed like she had been waiting for him. And then she said, "It's dark." My dad took one step down, and my mom whispered, "Don't." He stopped and the basement door opened. Not all the way, maybe 6 inches. Nobody was near it and the kitchen was empty. And then my grandma's voice came through the opening. Please, come get me. My dad looked completely wrecked. He kept staring at that door, and I could tell part of him wanted to go down there. And then the voice said, Why did you leave me there? My dad's entire face changed. He backed up 1 step, and my mom asked, What does that mean? He didn't answer her. From the basement, You said you'd stay. My dad whispered, No. And then, I waited for you. At that point, I knew this was not some strange grief thing we were all experiencing because my dad looked terrified, not sad, but terrified. He told us to go back into his bedroom, and before we could move, something stepped onto the basement stairs. We heard it clearly, 1 heavy step and then another. My dad pushed us behind him, and then there was another step. Whatever was down there was coming up now. My mom started crying, and I remember whispering, Should we leave? And my dad didn't answer. The footsteps kept climbing, and they were slow, like whoever was doing it knew we were listening. And then they stopped. The basement door was still cracked open. Nothing came through. We stood at the top of the main staircase, staring down into the kitchen. And then the basement door slowly swung shut. A few seconds later, Grandma's voice came from directly behind it. Open the door for me. Nobody moved, and she knocked once. Please. My dad said very quietly, That's not my mother. And there was silence, and then something on the other side of the door laughed, in my grandma's voice. It wasn't loud, and that was almost worse. Just this little laugh she used to do when someone said something ridiculous. And then the basement door shook so hard the frame rattled. My dad told us to go downstairs and go straight out the front door. We ran, and nothing followed us. We got into the car and drove to my aunt's house. My dad didn't explain anything on the way there. The next morning he went back with my uncle, and the basement was empty. The little window down there was still locked from the inside. Nothing had been broken, and nothing looked disturbed. And after that night, we never heard my grandma's voice in the house again. For years, I didn't know what she meant when she said, Why did you leave me there? My dad refused to talk about it, and I finally asked him again when I was an adult, and he told me something he never told anyone. The night my grandma died, he had been sitting beside her hospital bed for hours. He knew she was close, but at some point he couldn't handle watching anymore. So he stepped out. He went downstairs, sat in his car, and cried. And when he came back up, she was gone. He had promised her earlier that night that he would stay with her. Nobody knew he broke that promise. Not my mom or his brother. Definitely not me. He said he spent years feeling guilty because his mother died alone. And whatever was in our basement 2 weeks later knew exactly what to say to make him come downstairs. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
How am I just now finding out that Robert the Doll has apology letters plastered all around him from people begging him to lift his curse? Robert the Doll belonged to the Otto family in Key West, Florida in the early 1900s. According to legend, the family's servant was upset from some mistreatment. So she put a hex on this toddler-sized doll and gifted it to the family's young child, Robert, who went by Gene. Gene loved the doll so much that he named him after himself, hence why he's called Robert the Doll, and put him in his favorite sailor outfit, because again, life-size doll. But before long, strange things started happening in the Otto home. The parents started hearing footsteps around the home at night, and different servants reported seeing the doll move from room to room on its own. Neighbors even claimed they saw Robert staring out the upstairs window and sometimes waving. When his parents and servants would find Gene in a room alone with furniture flipped upside down and precious items left shattered on the ground, Gene would insist that Robert was the culprit. Everyone at first believed that Gene was just making excuses, but then these things would happen when only the doll was present. Gene's parents also recalled hearing Gene talk to the doll and said that a completely different voice was answering back. Years later, Gene grew up, became an artist, moved back into the same house, and even as an adult, he kept Robert and gave him his own room in the attic. Visitors said that Gene would speak to Robert as though he were a real person, and some claimed they heard replies coming from inside the room. Everyone in his life believed he had a very strange relationship with this doll. After Jean died in 1974, new owners moved into the house. They reported hearing footsteps in the attic, and when they went up there, they found Robert. This new family also claimed that Robert would change positions whenever they weren't looking, and their daughter later said that Robert came to life at night to try to hurt her. Eventually, these new owners donated Robert to the East Martello Museum in Key West, where he remains today. But even behind a glass case, he continues to torment people. And one thing he does is require you to ask for permission before taking pictures of him. Visitors who don't ask permission tell stories of broken cameras, sudden illnesses, car accidents, or just downright bad luck. So many people have become convinced that Robert put a curse on them. So in an attempt to break the curse, they write apology letters, begging for forgiveness for disrespecting him. And the staff has now displayed these hundreds of letters by Robert, and it should serve as a warning to future visitors that you do not want to cross Robert the doll.
I'm warning you right now, these videos are creepy. This first video was posted to YouTube in August of 2006. It shows a group of teenagers exploring what appears to be an abandoned school or building. When about 2 minutes into the video, we see what appears to be a headless figure walking straight towards the camera. And as if that's not already terrifying enough on its own, the teenagers filming this video don't even seem to notice it, which makes it even more terrifying. Some people think that maybe it's a reflection of one of the boys walking in front of a bright window and it's creating some kind of illusion. Others think it might be edited, and others think that it's genuinely paranormal. I think it's paranormal. Let me know what you think. This next video is commonly known as the Pray For Me Civil War ghost video. The footage shows a father and his son exploring an abandoned building that's supposedly an old Civil War era structure. As they're walking through the building, they can hear strange sounds and whispers, and some people think that one of these whispers says, "Pray for me." They continue recording and they come across this. The original source of this footage has never been clearly established, and this is a big reason why many people think that this is a staged or edited video. And then there's other people like me who think it's one of the most convincing paranormal videos they've ever seen. And this last video shows a couple of men walking around a big field, and they plan on going into an abandoned house to explore it. They're walking throughout the entire house, filming and talking amongst each other, when all of a sudden they capture this.
The roof is all fucked up. Holy!
You can see a completely black, human-shaped figure walking on one of the upper floors. And just like the previous two videos, this one is also heavily debated. Skeptics will argue that this was staged, it was some kind of illusion, or that it was even a squatter. Which personally, I think running into a squatter or a real-life person in one of these abandoned buildings is far scarier than running into some kind of spirit, but maybe that's just me. Either way, whatever was captured in this video is terrifying, and so is their reaction to it. As always, let me know what you think.
Have the Randonautica app installed on any of your devices, delete it immediately. This story came from someone named Caleb, and if you're not familiar, Randonautica is a location-based app that basically just generates a random GPS coordinate, and it urges its users to go and explore outside their comfort zone. I've never used the app, and from the stories I've read, I never want to. People theorize that it kind of gives you whatever you're looking for. And so anyway, Kayla says that she had used this app a couple of times, but she really wanted to have a scary experience. That's exactly what she got. So she said she's from a small town called Rolla Mo, if anyone is familiar. Her town is so small that she is very familiar with everywhere in the town. So she puts where she's at in the app, and it gives her a random GPS coordinate. And she said immediately it struck her as odd because where the coordinate was past where a road dead ends and what should end in a house. So she tells her boyfriend, like, I don't think there's anything there. And he's like, well, we're not doing anything else. Let's just go. And she's like, yeah, let's just go. So they drive there. This pin is in the middle of a field. Like, I've driven this road a million times and I've never noticed this field before, so that was also strange. But the road also seemed to go on a lot farther than where she felt it normally ended in a dead end. They park the car, they start walking out into this field, and as they're walking around, it's dark. She gets this very eerie sensation. She just doesn't want to be there. She's already creeped out. Maybe it's her mindset, right? So they keep walking, and her boyfriend's a couple feet in front of her. He's turning around every couple feet. He's kind of laughing at her. He's calling her a scaredy cat. He's like, whatever. And then all of a sudden she's struck with this sensation of like a vibration in her chest. And she said, I looked at my boyfriend and he had stopped dead in his tracks, and we looked at the phone and we were almost dead next to this GPS coordinate. She said the vibration was akin to when you're watching a scary movie and it's right before the jump scare. Her boyfriend's like, I don't like this feeling I'm having. And she's like, I don't either. So they just decide they're going to head back to the car. But as they're walking back to the car, she said they felt like something was watching them and was walking behind them. But every time they would turn around, there was nothing there. Also noticed that everything around them had gone dead quiet. Crickets, frogs, even the busy road that was on the other end of this field was silent. There were no cars. Everything's just silent. So she's looking at her boyfriend. He's looking at her, and she says, do not run, because whatever this is, I feel like there's a predator instinct and I don't want to be seen as prey. They keep their face, and then they start hearing footsteps, like something's crunching the ground behind them. But they turn around again and there's nothing there. They notice the footsteps stopped every time they turned around. So at this point, she's like, okay, there's foxes, there's coyotes, there's probably just something in this field that's watching us. Finally, the car comes into view, and as the car comes into view, she's like, I don't know what it was, but suddenly the night just seemed darker. Something inside me was screaming to just stop moving, and so I just stopped, and my boyfriend stopped. This terrified feeling came over both of them when all of a sudden her ears started ringing and she felt a tap on her shoulder. As she felt the tap off in the distance behind them, they heard this horrible, blood-curdling scream. At that point, both of them booked it. They both started running toward the car, and as they were running, this blood-curdling, inhuman scream was just sounding off in the distance. She says whatever this scream was, it did not stop. It was unbroken, even after they got in the car and peeled out of there. Fast forward, she is telling some of her friends about this experience, and her friends are all from the town too, and they're like, there's no field back there, like it's just a dead end with a house at the end of it. She's like, no, the road goes further than you think, and there's a field behind it, and that's when I heard this thing. Her friends are like, no. She's like, yeah, I'll take you there, I'll prove it to you. And so her friends get in the car, they go out there, and the road dead ends where she thought it did. Looking around, there's no field, nothing to indicate that the road went farther in any direction. She's like, this doesn't make any sense. She tells her boyfriend about it. Her boyfriend's like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I know I was there with you. There was definitely a field behind the house. And as they're turning around at this dead end of the road, this old woman comes out of the house. Snuck up so quickly that they didn't even notice her until she tapped on the window, and they rolled down the window, and she's like, are you all okay? And she said, I don't know what it was, but something about that woman leaned in the car asking if we were okay. I got that same eerie feeling as I felt out in the field. I don't know if the woman was involved somehow, and to this day, I don't know what I heard out there. But anytime someone tells me they have that app, I tell them to immediately delete it. She said, I truly feel like I had a weird parallel universe moment, and that this app led me to the exact moment that the portal opened. Let me know y'all's thoughts. Have you used this app? Would you use this app? Kayla's her real name, and she will be seeing the comments. And if you have a spooky, scary story time or something that happened to you that you think no one else would believe, please send it in. We would love to hear it.
Tonight's spooky story comes from someone who spent the better part of his childhood waking up to the same terrifying figure standing inside his bedroom closet. Years later, the image of that figure and the question of what it wanted still haunts him. So grab a blanket, maybe a snack, and get settled in for tonight's Midnight Confessions, Stories from the Dark. Back when I was about 8 years old, my family and I had moved into our house earlier that year. It was a 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood, and my bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hallway. I liked that it was larger than my old bedroom, but for some reason, it didn't have a closet. We hadn't noticed that when we toured the house before buying it. A few weeks after we moved in, my dad started fixing up some of the rooms. The wallpaper in my bedroom was old and peeling along one wall, so he decided to remove it and repaint. While pulling away one of the loose sections, he noticed that the drywall underneath looked different from the rest of the wall. He realized the newer drywall formed a large rectangle. He cut into the drywall and found the missing closet. My dad couldn't understand why anyone would go through the trouble of closing off a perfectly usable closet, especially in a bedroom. Since he was already renovating the room, he decided to restore the closet. I was excited once I was finally able to move into my new room, but shortly after, the scariest time of my life began. One night, sometime after midnight, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I looked around and noticed the closet doors, which I always made sure to close, were open, and a man was standing inside. At first, I could only see his silhouette because a faint orange light was flickering behind him. As my eyes adjusted, I began to see more of his horrifying frame. Most of his clothes were burned away. What remained looked black and stiff, and some pieces seemed fused into his skin. One side of his face was so badly charred that I could see several teeth through a hole in his cheek. His skin had split in places, revealing dark red cracks underneath. Out of pure instinct, I screamed for my parents. My dad came running into the room first and flipped on the light. As soon as the light came on, the burned man disappeared. I told my dad what I saw. He searched the closet and my room from top to bottom, but didn't find anything. Of course, my parents insisted that I'd had a nightmare, but I was too scared to stay in my room. I slept in theirs that night and for several nights after. The first night I was back in my room, I saw him again. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night and immediately smelled smoke. The closet doors were open, and he was standing in exactly the same place. I could see his expression. He had a pained, terrified look on his face. I pulled my blanket over my head and started crying. When I finally gathered enough courage to look again, he was gone, but the doors were still open. After that, I started seeing him several times a week in the middle of the night. One morning, my mom walked into my room and asked why it smelled like smoke. She checked the closet and noticed that the white paint along the inside edge of the door had begun to turn yellow. This was unusual because my dad had just painted the area. Thinking there must have been some sort of electrical issue, my parents had someone inspect the wiring upstairs. Everything was normal. That night, I woke up to the clicking of hangers knocking together. I opened my eyes and saw that the closet doors were open, and the burned man was there. As I stared at him through a small opening in the blanket covering my head, I noticed the closet looked deeper than it really was. My real closet was only a couple of feet deep, but now, behind the man, I could see another room. The walls in the room were covered in faded floral wallpaper. Fire crawled along the edges of the ceiling, and flames were spreading across the floor around it. Smoke rolled through the room in thick waves. The orange glow showed that the man was standing in front of a fire. Slowly, the burned man raised his hand and pointed at something behind my bed. I turned around, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the closet, the man seemed to have moved slightly closer, right at the threshold between the closet and my bedroom. Thinking he was about to cross over, I screamed. My parents came running again, and the moment they opened the door and the hallway light reached my room, everything I saw vanished. After several nights of sleeping in my parents' room, they sent me back to mine. A week went by without seeing the burned man, but something worse happened. I woke up on the floor of my parents' bedroom with both of them standing over me. My dad was shaking me, holding my shoulders. They told me that I appeared to be sleepwalking, that I had opened their door, stepped inside, and calmly told them that I was going to burn the house down with them inside. They said my eyes rolled to the back of my head while I repeatedly muttered the same phrase in a language they didn't understand. When I looked at my hands, I found black soot under my fingernails that had not been there before. I did not have a history of sleepwalking. A couple of nights later, I woke up to the smell of smoke. The room was hot, and the closet doors were open again. The burned man was standing far inside. He looked worse than before. More of his clothing was missing. Parts of his skin were blackened and peeling, and the hole in his cheek had widened. Behind him, the burning room was clearer than I had ever seen it. The man kept looking behind him. When he turned to look at me, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. A few seconds later, something moved in the burning room behind him. It was tall enough that its upper body disappeared into the smoke near the ceiling. I could only see a dark shape moving between the flames. The burned man immediately backed toward my bedroom. As the dark shape moved closer, the man continued to back away, getting closer to the bedroom with each step. I heard him whisper the words, "Close it." I saw something long and black, like a burned tree branch, reach through the fire. The burned man looked over his shoulder, then dropped to the floor and started crawling toward me. "Close it," he said again. The burned man reached one hand beyond the closet threshold, and his fingers touched my bedroom carpet. I jumped out of bed and ran toward the closet. I grabbed both doors and slammed them shut. I backed away from the closet and started screaming for my parents. My dad got there first. He tried to open the closet, but the handles were so hot that he had to wrap his shirt around his hand before touching them again. When he finally opened the doors, the closet appeared normal. The only thing left was a black handprint on the inside of the door. Within days, my dad emptied the closet and covered the entire opening with drywall. Although he couldn't explain why the doors were hot, he figured this was enough proof that the previous owners sealed the closet for a reason. We lived in that house for another 6 years. The smell of smoke never came back, and I never saw the burned man again. Okay, can we normalize when you're selling your home, if you had to close off a whole section of your house because, I don't know, it's some sort of portal or it's haunted or something, that you would pass along this information to the new owners? I feel like that's just common courtesy, or maybe that's just me. I don't know what that was. As always, thanks for spending the night with me. If you love spooky stories, be sure to follow for more Midnight Confessions.
Here are more spooky stories that I found on Reddit. Let's go! When I was like 14, I lived in what used to be a boarding house in the 1800s. My mom worked all the time and my brother was always out, so it was usually just me and our dog. One night I was sitting on the couch and heard what sounded like furniture getting moved upstairs. My dog was a sweet old girl, and that was the first time I'd heard her growl. We got up and stood at the base of the stairs, and she just sat down staring up, growling with her hackles raised. We also had an antique banjo in the house, and one night both me and my dad heard it strum once on its own. I have many stories about that place. One summer when I was like 8 or 9 years old, my friend next door asked if I wanted to go out in the woods and play war. This was in the 80s, and we loved G.I. Joe, and we lived out in the country, so this was something we did on a regular basis. I told him let me change into my camouflage shirt and went to my house. My parents were outside and my brother wasn't home, so I was the only one inside. I went into my room and started looking for my shirt, thinking I left it on the bed or the floor. Then for no reason, it fell from above and landed on my shoulder. Mind you, I was standing in the middle of the room and the only thing above me was the ceiling. I ran out of the house and told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I'm 50 now and I still remember it vividly and have no explanation for what happened. Nothing like it has happened since. My wife and I were going home in the early morning after a family member had passed away, so this was around 4-ish, no one on the road. In the distance, I saw 2 bright lights and initially thought it was stars. After a while, I noticed that they seemed to be moving, so I stopped my car to confirm. I continued driving and the lights would follow. After a while, I tried to test it by turning into a smaller road, and it still followed. Then I started following it because I had to figure out what it was, but then it went away behind some trees. I started driving home and then I saw them again following us at a distance. When I came home, I went out onto my porch and they were headed straight towards me. The mountaintop is about 500 meters away and you can see they are closing in here. I stood there watching for a while and noticed that they made 0 sound. I checked the flight radar and no aircraft was supposed to be in the air. I snapped this pic before my wife ordered me inside. Here is the picture that was attached to this post. Weirdly, it kind of looks like 2 helicopters, but the fact that they made no noise is very odd. I was sitting at home watching a movie in my living room when the door handle on my sister's bedroom started shaking. We were both adults and I knew she'd gone out for the evening. She swore up and down that my little house, built in the 40s, was haunted and I always dismissed this. Anyway, the first time it happened, I just shrugged it off thinking I'd imagined it. About 5 minutes later, it happened again. I was so freaked out that I went outside and just stood in the front yard for a good 15 minutes trying to reason with myself. I even called her and confirmed she was out. I finally shored up my courage and went back inside. I decided to open her door, and as soon as I did, my cat ran out. The little creep had run in before she left for the evening and she hadn't seen him. He had been sitting on the dresser rattling the doorknob. I felt so stupid. Now, all that being said, it turns out she was right and it really was haunted. A few months later, I saw something pretending to be her. I was in our bathroom, which was located down a short hallway, and I heard her knock on the door to ask when I'd be finished. I told her I'd be out in a few minutes. I finished up and opened the door just in time to see her turn the corner into our kitchen. I followed after to let her know it was free, but when I turned the corner, no one was there. I went looking for her and found her in her bedroom across the house. I told her that the bathroom is free and she just looked at me and asked why I was letting her know. That was the only experience I had in the house, but she had many more. I sold it about 15 years later and still have dreams about it sometimes. I was on the phone talking to a friend late at night. I was getting a drink out of the fridge when I saw the shadow of a man in the hallway by our bedroom door facing me. I thought it was my husband. I was reaching into the fridge and told my friend, "Hang on a second, I think my husband needs something, he's out of bed." I turned to ask him what he needed / if he was okay, and the shadow was gone. Scared bliss. I had my friend stay on the phone while I went to our room to check on him. He was sound asleep. I shared an apartment in New York City and an entity started using our voices. Roommate called out from the other room and I responded, but turns out nobody was there. Other roommates experienced the same thing extremely clearly. It would use our voices interchangeably. We started leaving our work schedules or texting when we were home / not home in an effort to stop responding to the trickery / mimic entity. This was 2009-ish. We moved and everyone went separate ways and nothing happened after leaving. Lots of mimic stories this time around. It seems like a lot of people have been having experiences with mimics. A coworker and I were waiting on an elevator to go down. The elevator door opened with a person inside, but our arrow down light was still on, so we figured the car was going up. The door shut and immediately opened again with nobody inside. I asked my coworker if he saw anything, and he described the same person I saw. We never spoke about that again. Lying in bed, tossing my t-shirt into the air, talking to my wife in the shower. I threw the shirt up, and instead of dropping back into my hand, it was suspended in the air for a few seconds before finally dropping back down. My wife was walking out of the bathroom at the same time and witnessed the event. As always, I love these stories. Okay, bye!
When I was a kid, I had a friend who came to visit every year and we would stay at her cabin for the summer. Her cabin always had a weird feeling to it. It was really old and run down, and we especially noticed it upstairs and in the kitchen, where there was an old table her family said had come from a morgue. One night, we were playing around with her Nintendo DS and taking pictures with different filters. Years later, we were looking through them again for a laugh when we noticed something in the background of one photo. Neither of us had noticed it when we took the picture, and we couldn't explain what it was. My mom is a very sensitive person, and she used to complain about having nausea near a friend of mine. One time, she even dreamt about a demon standing on top of this friend while I was sleeping at her house. One time, we were having lunch while we were talking about this dream that my mom had. My cup suddenly started to move by itself. I had trouble believing it at first, but it just seems like too much of a coincidence that we were talking about demons when it moved by itself. My family owns the cemetery in my town in Jalisco, Mexico. I had always been curious in the paranormal, and I never knew if it was actually real. I told my dad I was gonna go let everybody know that the cemetery was closing, but I also decided to go walk around and try to communicate with any spirits. I kept saying, "Show yourself," or "Move something." Once I reviewed my videos, I was left terrified and shocked that I was alone with these things in a cemetery.
Mermaids are 100% real, and the government is actively trying to hide that fact from you. So my dad, he works on a fishing boat, and what they do is they go take this boat out deep into the middle of the ocean and take this real big massive net and cast it into the middle of the water and then scoop up everything they can. Once they scoop up everything, they'll lay the net out in the boat and then take out the fish that they want to keep, and everything else that they don't keep, they'll cast the net back into the water and the fish will go back into the ocean. So my dad told me that one day they do the regular thing. They cast this big giant net into the ocean, scrape it back up, throw it on the boat. He's sitting more at the top of the boat and he's looking down at the people who are pulling the net out of the water and analyzing everything that's in there. And then all of a sudden, as they're looking through the net and looking at all the things they got, he starts to see these people start freaking out and looking at each other and kind of just looking very erratic. They all start calling to everybody like, you guys need to come see this. They're calling everyone over to come see what they have. So my dad's like, what the hell did these guys find? Did they pull up a shark or a dolphin or something? Like, let me go check out what these people are doing. So as he approaches the net in the middle of the boat with all this fish in it, he can see this one very, very abnormally large fish. It's very big. It's not big like a whale, but it's big, way bigger than any fish that they normally pull out of this spot of the ocean. The closer he gets, the more he realizes that this fish is in the shape of a human, like it's a very humanoid looking fish. My dad said that this creature had a humanoid shape. It was in the shape of a human, but it was missing a lot of the features that us humans have. He said its skin looked different, its eyes looked different, its nose looked different. It was a human shape, but not human features. After everyone is seeing this weird humanoid fish creature on this boat, everyone was freaking out. They really didn't know what to do. Mind you, the thing is still alive and it's sitting there kind of just like wiggling around and moving around while everyone's just circled around it, just staring at it, not knowing what to do. All the guys on the boat took pictures of it and started sending it to their families and stuff, and then everyone started talking and they're thinking, okay, we need to dump this thing back into the ocean. We don't want this on the boat. We don't know what it is. We're going to release it back into the ocean. We're going to be humane about it. So that's what they do. They cast this net, they throw it back into the ocean, and they let everything go. Flash forward a week or so and my dad's actually back home. He's not out on his boat anymore. We hear someone knocking at our front door. So me and my dad, we go walk to the door, we open it, and we look and see who's standing there, and it's these two men in full black suits. One of the men steps forward and he goes, hello sir, I'm here with the United States government, and he flashes us a badge and he's like, we would like to speak to you if that's alright. So we invite this man in and we're sitting down at the table, and he basically tells my dad that he's not allowed to talk about what he saw on this boat, and he made my dad sign an NDA. He went and deleted the pictures on my dad's phone, made it very clear that my dad should not talk about this to anybody ever, or else he will suffer consequences, legal consequences. But unluckily for these people, I did not sign an NDA. So that's why I'm here to tell you my story, or I guess my dad's story.
In 1972, a woman visited St. Mary's Church in Norfolk, United Kingdom. Her husband had taken a photo of her sitting alone on a pew. When the film was developed, what appeared to be a spectral figure was clearly visible sitting beside her. The woman claims no one else was near her at the time, and the church was empty. This was captured on a ghost tour that I went on years ago in Charleston. It was taken in an old historic cemetery next to a church. You can see what looks like a face on the tombstone on the far right of the photo. I never noticed it until my friend was looking at pictures I took for my trip and pointed it out to me. I think I caught a photo of the Grim Reaper. I took this during a haunted cemetery tour in Houston, Texas. It was getting a little dark, and I snapped several images of the cemetery on my iPhone, and I used the night mode feature. While going through the pictures, I noticed this figure in only one of the pictures, and as I zoomed in, I was freaking out. I can make out what looks like a figure wearing a black robe with the face of a skeleton.
Why is it that the sun looks like an LED light now? And why is it that all of the sudden, when we switched to LED bulbs, the sun started to look more and more like an LED light? Because I remember the sun being that yellow orangish hue. Remember, we used to call it the golden sunlight. It was amazing. It was beautiful. And then all of a sudden it changed. And it's like, why did we switch to these LED bulbs? We were told they were cheaper and they were brighter and we could see better. But I don't know anybody that saved money on their utility bill because of these lights. I don't know anybody that can see better because of these lights. They look brighter, but they're actually very dim. Now, I started to think about it more. I remember something my grandma used to do. And at the time, I didn't realize what she was doing. But she did not like LED lights. She wanted to keep the original orangish, yellowish hue incandescent bulbs in her home. She would not switch to LED. And for some reason, she was afraid of it. Now, my grandma was this very spiritual person who was very much aware of what was going to happen in the future. So she was always being prepared. And I really think that she knew something about these LED bulbs that most people didn't. That there was something dark and sinister to it. And then I started to think more about it. Wait a second. When they switched to these LED bulbs, I started having problems with my eyes. I had 20/20 vision, but now I have to wear glasses to see all the time. The light outside, the light inside, right, it hurts my eyes. I do not like these LED bulbs. It makes it hard to drive at night. It makes it hard to see. I also noticed I started getting anxiety from these lights. I started feeling sick all the time. And I'm not the only person. I'm sure there are so many people who describe the exact same thing that happened when we changed out these bulbs. And when you look, right, all throughout history, all throughout different cultures and religions, right, one of the things they always talk about is the eye. The eye is always this important thing. So think about it. If this light was damaging our eye, it would prevent us from seeing what was going on. So what if these LED lights, what if all of these changes are to allow something dark, something evil, something sinister to walk among us without us being able to see it? I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you like these new LED lights, or do you think there's something more to them?
Someone recently tagged me in a really upsetting video. No hate to the person who tagged me, but it was really hard to watch, and I'll put the video here. They tagged me in this because I used to work at Claire's. Keyword used to. I do not work there anymore, and asked if I had any opinions on it because of what my job was. I'm making a video because, yes, I have a lot of opinions on that, and I have had them for a while. I had this mom come in one time, and her kid was like 2 years old, and initially her kid really wanted to get her ears pierced, and it was super fun, but then when she got in the chair, she was just freaking out, and it was way too stressful, and she did not want to do it anymore. So I told the mom that we could not do the piercing because she was saying no. It's in Claire's policy that you can't do a piercing if the person being pierced is telling you no. We're not going to force a child into doing that. However, with baby piercings, because the baby cannot say no, which I have a problem with this, we are able to do the piercings where the parent holds their arms down and holds their head while we pierce each ear. That is how baby piercings are done. So the mom ended up asking me about it, and she was like, you know, I had this baby a while ago and we got our ears pierced like this, and this is what we did. And I was like, I can't do that with your daughter because she's not in the age range that we do that. She would have to be a baby, and she's not. She's a toddler. She's too big. You know, we can't do it. The real reason is probably just because they can say no, which gets to me bad. Babies being pierced regardless and not being able to verbally give consent is a whole entire nother video, but her mom then started to kind of just like berate me and be like, who do you think you are to tell me what to do with my daughter and how to parent my daughter? Like, I want her ears pierced. She's going to get them pierced. We drove all this way and we're doing it that way. And she was like freaking out at me. And eventually I hit a point where I was just like, I can't do this. Like, so I walked away and I told my coworker, like, if you want to do that piercing, that's on you, but morally, I'm not going to do it. Now, I can't confidently say where the piercing in that video took place. I don't think it's a Claire's, and I don't know their policy, right? But I can confidently say that that cannot be ethical. Like holding a child down who is clearly saying no to something that is cosmetic for aesthetic purposes. This isn't like a vaccine. This is a choice, a decision that the parents or the child is going to make, holding a child down who is actively fighting against an ear piercing and saying they do not want their ears pierced and they're too scared. That is not a good experience. The whole point in kids getting their ears pierced at like places like Claire's, right? And the reason that I was able to, when working there, justify not getting pierced with a hollow needle is that sometimes piercing shops are scary for little kids, and that's a harsh experience. And being somewhere that's really fun for them and really sweet and is like good positive energy for them made that feel justified to me. It is no longer justified if they're screaming and crying and fighting to get out of the situation because they don't want something and they're being forced into it. If you, as a parent, are forcing your screaming, crying child to sit still while they get an ear piercing, again, aesthetic purposes, you are the problem. You want your kid's ears pierced. It's not about what the kid wants. It's that you want your kid to have pretty earrings and you want to dress them up, and that's messed up, and that's really, really bad. That is my opinion, unfiltered, on that video and that whole situation.
Did you know that diamond engagement rings didn't start as tradition? They were actually collateral. If a man proposed to you and then changed his mind, you could sue him. The reasoning was that it lowered a woman's value on the marketplace. So legally, he owed you money for this. I'm going through a phase where I'm trying to bring down the patriarchy, and I've evolved into a goddess in order to do so. The engagement was treated as a contract. It was called breach of promise to marry because the damages were calculated on something you can't put a price on: your reputation. Mostly a woman's reputation, and her perceived purity, I'll say. So legally, he owed you money for it. Then, in the 1930s, states started abolishing this practice. The courts decided that the suits were basically legalized blackmail, which was progress, arguably, except now women didn't have bargaining chips. No contract, no leverage, no payout. And that's where this man saw an opportunity. In 1938, a man wrote an advertising agency and asked, in writing, whether the use of propaganda could actually grow the engagement ring market. So, the diamond ring became collateral, so the man hands the woman something expensive at the start, because there's no longer a court that will make him pay if he changes his mind. It was, of course, incredibly successful. In fact, before the war, about 10% of proposals involved a diamond, and by 1965, it was 80%. But here's the part that's so nefarious, I'm almost impressed by it. Despite the popularity of diamond engagement rings, they actually convinced you that you weren't able to sell them. They even ran a campaign convincing people that diamond engagement rings couldn't be resold, and threatened to cut off any dealer who bought a diamond ring back. So the cruel irony was that the collateral became worthless when you actually needed it. Fun fact, that campaign was spearheaded by a woman because women were always given the women accounts, and she never married. Thank you for listening.
I worked the night shift at a nursing home, and one of the residents kept asking me to go check on the woman in room 214, but room 214 had been empty for years. I worked at this nursing home for about 8 months, and I had a specific old man that I watched over, and his name was Harold, and he was always awake between 2 or 3 a.m. He was very lucid, and he always recognized me. One night I was helping him get back into his bed, and he grabbed my arm, and he said, "Can you please go check on Margaret?" And I said, "Oh, like, who's Margaret?" He said, "She's in room 214. She's been crying all night." I told him that there isn't a resident named Margaret, and he looked at me really strange, and he just said, "There hasn't been for a really long time." And I said, "Okay, Harold, let's get you back to bed." A few minutes later, I heard actual quiet, like, crying in the hallway, and I tried to follow it, and it did lead me to room 214, but once I opened the door, I saw that the room was being used for storage. There wasn't even like a bed inside of the room, and I checked a couple other rooms and I didn't hear any crying. So I went back to the nurse's station, and then about 20 minutes after that, I got another call from Harold. He told me that Margaret was still crying, and I asked him how he knew, and he said because she always cries when it's dark. And I told him, okay, like, don't worry about Harold, I'll go check on it, even though I knew that there wasn't a Margaret staying here with us. I did wind up asking one of my coworkers about it, though. She had worked there longer than me, so I figured if there was somebody named Margaret that used to be here, she would know. And she did tell me that there was somebody named Margaret, and she died a few years earlier, and in her last couple of months, she was for certain that her daughter was going to come and visit her. The really sad part is her daughter never actually came to visit, and I guess Margaret stayed up a lot of nights crying about it. Eventually, they actually found her sitting by the door when they went and checked on her in the morning, and she passed away, and she was probably sitting by the door waiting for her daughter. It definitely spooked me a little bit, but it did make more sense that Harold was probably just remembering like an older person that used to be here. Maybe they were friends. One night I was walking through the hallway, and I did hear like, it felt like a presence was behind me, so I looked behind me and I didn't see anybody, so I kept walking, and then that's when I heard it. It was a very soft voice, and it said, "Is she here yet?" I didn't look behind me this time. I was so creeped out, and I went straight back to the nurse's station, and then the morning came, and I went to go check in on Harold, and he was still asleep, but I did notice that there was like this little slip of paper beside his bed. It had 4 words on it. It said, "She came back tonight," And so I waited for Harold to wake up and I asked him about it to see if he'd remember anything. And he just told me, I told you she was waiting. The strangest part of this job actually happened after I left. So I guess not too long after I left, Harold did pass away. It was very peaceful, but my coworker did tell me something that stuck with me. She told me that the night that he was about to pass away, he kept telling them to open up the door to 214. And when they kept telling Harold that there's nobody in there, all he had to say was, there is now.
There's something going on in Washington state. Now, there have been so many reports of people who are seeing these orbs of light, and they have seen them in the sky. They've seen them chase people. They've seen them moving through the woods at incredible speeds. They're described as to be about the size of a baseball to a basketball. They come in many different colors. They seem to show some kind of intelligence. Even a few people have said that these things have spoke to them or communicated with them. Now, there was a story out of Lakeland, Washington. There was this man named Stephen. Stephen said that him and his family for about 40 years have been seeing these strange orbs of light. He said it started with his grandfather, and then his father and his mother, and then him eventually. He said they will often see them in the sky at night. Sometimes they will follow their vehicles. Sometimes they see them just passing by down the street. He said his uncle even reported to be chased by one of these things. But he said the strangest encounter happened with his grandfather. When his grandfather was a young boy, he was in his bedroom one night. And as he sat in his bed, he said all of a sudden his room went silent. He said it was so quiet you could hear the drop of a pin. And he said that's when he looked over to his window and he sees this very bright light, like a spotlight shining at his window. And that's when he sees this ball of light come through the glass. This thing was about the size of a softball, and it was hovering about 3 feet off the ground. It moved over into the corner of his room, and it sort of sat there. So then this thing descended down to the ground, and it moved all the way to the foot of his bed. It went up, came down, and hovered right next to his leg. He said then it went up to his shoulder, up to his head, and then it went back up the wall. So that's when it took off back over into the corner. He said he started to notice it was pulsating, and it began to change colors. At first it was white, and now it was turning this very dark blue. He said he felt like there was some sort of anger or just something evil about this thing. He said it then darted in his direction. And the next thing he remembers is feeling this sort of energy go through his body and seeing this bright flash of light. The next thing he knows, he is downstairs in the living room on the ground. He has this huge gash on his leg. He has a huge gash on his arm. He ended up having to get 27 stitches. Now he tells his father about all this. And his father says, you were probably just roughhousing and you fell down the stairs. He said, no, I seen this light. It was real. And somehow it transported me from my bedroom down to the living room. And he said the next day there was a knock at the door. He said there were these two men in suits and ties. And he said they came in, they talked to his father, and they said they were asking about some strange lights that had been seen in the area. He said he got ready to say something when his father just gave him this look like, you better not say anything. So he kept quiet. And he said he knew that whatever he had seen had something to be connected with those two men that came over. And it's believed that still to this day, his grandfather claims that these lights are evil. Now, not too far from this general area, there was another story that took place. There was this young man. His name was Baker. Baker said him and his family, they lived in this duplex apartment. And he said the downstairs neighbors, there were these two Filipino guys. So they were very quiet. You hardly ever seen them. And he said they always acted very, very strange. And he kind of got this weird feeling about them. He said one night, his father told him to take out the trash. So he said he grabbed the trash bags, he opened the front door, and he goes down the stairs. Well, where these garbage cans were located, it was right next to the woods. And he said as he put the garbage bag into the garbage can, he looked over and he noticed these two Filipino men were looking around the woods for something. He said they were acting very erratic and strange. So he said he ran inside. He told his father, like, something's going on with these guys. Like, they're up to something. I know it. And so his dad and him went back outside. And his father walked over to the woods and he starts yelling, hey, are you guys all right? Like, is everything okay? He said they didn't hear a response, but they heard the sound of something rustling the trees. So he said him and his father, they proceeded into the woods. They came to this fence. So on the other side of the fence, they began to see this glowing light the size of a basketball. And he said that's when this ball started to talk to them, but not just physically talk to them. It was somehow telepathically talking to them in their head. And he said each one, him and his father, they were told different things. They were given different conversations. Although they were both standing right next to each other, they could hear these things talking to them, telling them separate things. So he said this ball of light then just took off into the sky. Well, the next day, he said his father and him went to check on these guys that were downstairs. But they soon found out that they had moved. And apparently that morning, they had moved out. And still to this day, he has no idea what they seen there out in the woods behind the house.
Want to start streaming today? Tap the Go Live link below to test it now.
Let's read a true, scary story. Welcome to the Creepy Cozy Cottage, where creepy and cozy meet. So grab a plushie and get cozy. I'm a 21-year-old male, slim, athletic, and I'm a night owl. This happened November 14th, 2022. I don't really know how to explain what happened that night, and honestly, I still think about it. This happened while I was housekeeping at a mansion. It was winter and it was already completely dark outside. I'd been asked to take the owner's 2 dogs for a walk. It was around 9 p.m. and normally it wasn't anything unusual. I only had to walk down a dirt road, turn a corner, and I'd be at the woods. I'd already taken the dogs through some woods those previous 2 days and nothing happened either time. There were usually people walking through, cars passing on the main road nearby, birds making noise, and the occasional squirrel running around. But that night was different. The moment I reached the woods, I noticed how quiet it was. Not normal quiet. There were no birds, no cars, no people, nothing. It was like the entire place had suddenly emptied. I remember thinking it was strange, but I carried on anyway. I had a flashlight I'd bought from Amazon. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't powerful enough to make me feel comfortable in the middle of a dark woodland. And the only protection I had were 2 Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. They're great dogs, but realistically they weren't going to protect me from anyone. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I started getting this weird feeling that someone was nearby. I didn't actually see anyone. It was just a feeling. I ignored it. About 2 minutes later, I heard a loud bang. It sounded almost like 2 rocks being smashed together. I stopped. I listened. Nothing. My first thought was that it was probably the squirrels. There were loads of them in the woods, and I'd already heard branches and twigs snapping earlier. But deep down, I knew it wasn't what I heard. Still, I convinced myself it was. I carried on walking. For a while, I actually started calming down again. Then, about 10 minutes after the bang, I heard a scream. That completely changed everything. It was around 10 p.m. by then, and I'd already been in the woods for roughly an hour. I decided I was leaving. I turned around, and that's when one of the dogs stopped. He started growling toward the path we'd just come from. I froze. Then I got my phone out and called the owners. I told them everything. Their reaction scared me more than anything that happened so far. They immediately told me to get out. Not to walk back the way I'd come. They told me to open the compass on my phone and head north from the trail I was on. Apparently, if I followed north, I'd eventually reach a farmer's field. So that's exactly what I did. I opened the compass and started walking north as quickly as I could. Then one of the dogs stopped again. He turned around and started growling. The other dog did the same thing, except this time he started barking, and then I heard it, panting. A few seconds later, someone dressed completely in black suddenly ran out of the trees and onto the trail. They crossed the path and disappeared into the other side. I swear the person looked at least 6 feet tall. I didn't stop to think, I just ran. The problem was that I have a pretty bad vision, especially in the dark, and the dogs were resisting because they were terrified too. I was basically trying to drag myself, my 2 dogs, and my own panic through the woods. Eventually, I saw the farmer's field. I thought I was out. Then I realized there was a fence and roughly a 5-foot drop between me and the field. I picked up one of the dogs and lifted him over. Then I got the second one across. I threw one lead down, jumped down myself while holding one of the dogs, then pulled the other dog down after me. I caught him and started running again. I was almost at the road when I heard something behind me. I'm certain I heard someone scream. Then I heard a laugh. It was deep, really deep. That was the moment I completely lost it. I ran until I reached the main road. I stood there trying to get a car to stop. Eventually, someone did. I told them what happened. They basically said it was probably kids messing around. Maybe they were right, and maybe there's a completely normal explanation for everything. Maybe the bang really was just a couple of rocks. Maybe the scream was someone messing around. Maybe the person in black was just some random person walking through the woods. Maybe the laugh wasn't as deep as I remember. But I know what I experienced and I know what I saw. I got home at around 11:30 p.m. I stayed inside the mansion for the remaining 4 days until the owner came back. I didn't go near those woods again. I haven't gone back since. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. Let me know what you think, and if you have any scary stories of your own you'd like me to read, just send me a DM.
There's a particular set of rules that you must remember if you are to camp alone. Now, the first rule of camping alone is never set up your tent at night, because this is when you are the most vulnerable and you cannot keep focus on what's behind you, what's around you, because you're focused on putting up the tent. The second rule is always have a fire going. No matter what time of day it is, always keep that fire going and keep it nice and bright and tall. The third rule that you must remember if you're camping alone is when you go in your tent at night, make sure it is completely sealed up. No holes, make sure everything is zipped and closed, because it's believed that stuff can even come in through the tiniest of cracks. Now, the fourth rule, when you are camping alone, you should never make noise at night. You should never whistle. You should never sing. You should try and keep it quiet as possible. Now, the fifth rule, which is the most important, is always have some sort of entertainment. Keep yourself occupied. Have some music. Have an audiobook, but never let yourself start to wander and let your mind go, because that's when you are the most vulnerable. Now, there was this man named Jonathan. Jonathan decided he was going to go camping alone up in the Rocky Mountains. So he heads up to the spot and he sets up his tent and gets his campsite ready. And he said he just remembered that, there were all these sounds of wildlife and the wind blowing, and it was just very peaceful and sort of like musical. And he said, he had his dog with him, and they sat around the fire for a bit, and it started to get late, so he decided to go into his tent. So as he goes in his tent, his dog lays over to the side of him, and soon he begins to doze off. Well, at some point in time in the night, he awakes to something shaking his tent. And he said he could hear this voice saying, "Please come out of the tent. Like, I need help. Help me, please. Get out of the tent. Help me." And so he's like, what's going on? Like, what's going on? So he goes to the zipper, he unzips the tent, and he goes outside. But when he gets out of the tent, there's nobody around. It's just completely quiet. And it was eerily quiet because he couldn't hear the wind anymore. He couldn't hear the wildlife. And he said that the other strange thing was when he went to bed, there was this bright full moon overhead. But as he looked up in the sky, the moon was gone. There wasn't any clouds. It was a completely clear night. But the moon somehow had disappeared. So this kind of freaked him out a little bit. He goes back inside his tent and he zips up the zipper. Well, he lays down and he said, his dog would come to the side of him or would lay by his feet, and that always made him feel a little better. So he said, he started to kind of doze off again. He said that's when he kept feeling like the dog, like rubbing his leg. And he's like, "What are you doing, boy? Like, I'm trying to sleep." And he said that's when he looks down at his feet and there's nothing there. And when he looks over, his dog is right over here towards his head. So he is like, what's going on? Like, was there an animal or something? He unzips the tent, he goes outside, said, there was nothing out there. As he got ready to go back in his tent, he said he started to see these shadows. He said he could see figures that looked like they were tall, skinny, kind of lanky. They almost looked like they were crawling around amongst the trees. They were all around him. So he hurried up, got back inside his tent, and he zips it up. And he just said, he's just sitting there with his dog. And the whole time he thought it was strange because the dog didn't alert to any of this. It didn't bark. It was just quiet. It was just laying there. And he said that's when all of a sudden he felt this tent start to move. Something grabbed the tent and was dragging him. And he was so afraid that he passes out. And when he awakes, he said the tent was completely still, felt like everything was normal again. He said he thought it must have been a dream. Until he unzips the tent and he realizes he is a good distance away from his campsite. So he grabs his dog and they run out of there back to his vehicle, and they left that night. And they left the tent and everything behind. So it's important to remember, when you camp alone, always know the rules.
Want to start streaming today? Tap the Go Live link below to test it now.
Hello everyone. I decided that I wanted to do a story time on like one of the most scariest like paranormal encounters that I have had. Believe it or not, I don't give a fuck. I don't know if I should speed it up or not because it might be a long story. I'll cut it a little bit short for you guys. Okay, so as you know, my best friend Brina, which is on the account that I may be posting this on, I probably post on two accounts. Oh, and if you want to, see the other account, it is still Catcast. I'll take it. Okay, so from the beginning of the story, me and my friend, we were having a sleepover. Okay, so we were having a sleepover. We go out at night. We lived by a lake, so there was like a lake, like beach area, and it was like going like across from the sea. So yeah, and we lived in the center of that. So yeah, I don't know. It's really like annoying that there's a woods there, like little woods. I don't know. So we were walking down to the street. Like imagine like there's like a street. There's like a plaza of like a bunch of stores. We're going down the street where it's just a neighborhood, and then there's like a high school at the end where it's by the lake. There's a high school by the lake. So that's where we were going. We ended up there. So when we ended up there, we were just like walking around. It was nighttime. It was nighttime. It was probably like 12 a.m. This happened around like 2024, 2025? No, 2024, summer 2024. So we were just sitting there, and then we started seeing like a light, and it's creepy because it was like summer, so it was like kind of warm, but we were by the lake, so it was like a little bit windy, I don't know. But we see a light, and it was like a big light. It was like this, but it was really far away from us, so it was in the field, by the high school, by the woods. So imagine seeing on the field, it was a bright light. I'm pretty sure I went like red a few times, but it was white, and then it just turned green. It was weird. So it was going like, it was on the ground, and it was going up like really fucking tall, so it couldn't have been a human, right? So it was going really tall. And then it was going down, and it was like really close to the ground, so we're wondering what the fuck it is, because what else could it be? It can't be an animal. How the fuck is it going up there? Maybe it's a fucking bird? What? No. So it's going to the ground, crawling on the ground, like if you can't see a person, it's just the light. So it's going like up in the sky, like not in the sky, but like pretty fucking tall, like maybe like 7 feet up in the sky, like I don't know. Like it is pretty high. So just imagine that, changing lights, and we're like, what the fuck is that? Like it started disappearing, mind my words, disappearing, and then it just comes back. It's like weird. So we decided to say something, like scream something. I'm pretty sure my friend screamed something. I was like, what the fuck? No, don't do that. So then it finally starts walking, like after like a good like 30-40 minutes, it starts walking. And it goes to like, okay, you know how high schools they have a parking lot, and then there's a park? There's a parking lot, and the parking lot leads out to where there's like a sidewalk. And then we were sitting on like little benches by the woods. So that's what we were saying. So we go into obviously our dumbasses. We go into the parking lot, and we see that it's a fucking man. Not 7 feet tall, mind you, it was the normal height of a man, and he was like older, mid-40s. Obviously, like the dumbasses we were. No, I'm not gonna say we're as past tense. We are. We go up to him, and we're like, hello, hello. And he didn't respond. We're like, are you okay? Because what the fuck? What? And mind you, he has a tablet, like a square big box of a bright light, and it wasn't a phone. I don't know what the fuck it is. When I asked what the fuck it was, I don't know what the fuck it was. Wait, let me get it like bigger than this box. Like it was like, sorry, I don't have that. So yeah, it was that fucking big. So what the fuck? So then we're like, hello. So he's not responding. He's walking, not looking back. So what's the obvious reason? Of course, he followed him to his house. So we follow him to his house, and we're walking behind him, like pretty walking behind him, but like it's quite obvious if he knew, but he didn't look back once, not once. He was getting like 3 in the morning, like 4 in the morning, maybe 2. I think it was 2 in the morning when we started walking, but yeah, we ended up walking a lot. So yeah, we can tell you the story of like walking, like it's not that big of a deal. So he's not looking back. The screen doesn't darken like an iPad would. The screen just stayed bright as fuck, and it is not a flashlight. What the fuck is it? And how does it change colors? So I'm like, what the fuck is this stupid like big ass thing? Like who is this person? We don't know who the person is. But obviously we make like the creepy in the situation, but we want to figure out who the fuck this is. Who is this man? So we're following like a little bit far. Like it's like okay, him, us on like a. But we like stayed like close enough to see where the fuck he's going, where he's turning, where he is. Like we could see him. And if he looks back, he could see us. So we're walking for quite a bit. We're turning. He just knows where he's fucking going clearly. But why are you in a dark field, crawling on the ground, going up in the air? If you're a fucking old, like 40-year-old man alone. Like me and my friend, we had an excuse. We were just young, bored. Like what the fuck? What are we supposed to do? Actually, we're just going out for a walk, like sitting down, talking and stuff. This man has no excuse. Why the fuck are you out? I don't know. Whatever. So we're like following him. We're looking like seeing where he's going. We're talking. We're like, what the fuck is this? Like. So then we finally, after like an hour, it's 4 in the morning, maybe 5 in the morning. We finally reach the end. He goes into a dead end road. So okay, road, and there's a circle. That's where he is. He's standing in the middle of it, like maybe near the end. We turn. We are looking at him. So okay. Let me try to explain this better. Okay, the dead end road goes like this. There's a corner going leading into it, and there's a big road, and there's a bunch of houses. So we were creeping around the corner like this. He's like this. He fucking turns around. First time, he didn't turn around once. He turns around, standing, and he looks at us, like standing, like directly at us, and he turns around, he does a smile, he's smiling like this already. He doesn't like just like, no, he was smiling up to here, and it was black. What the fuck? I don't know if it was light, because it's like 4 in the morning, but there was lights in the street. My friend seen this better than I did. Personally, I seen it, but I bolted. I didn't waste no time because we had like survival instincts of the fucking nut, but not at that moment because bitch, what the fuck? It's like I didn't fucking do it because it was inhumane. What the fuck? It was so fucking bad. Like don't even play with me. I was running, like, and we weren't dumbass bitches, so we were running and we hid behind a car, obviously, because what the fuck? We're not just gonna go running. We hid because bitch, the fuck, he would have seen us. But no, he didn't chase us. I don't know because we stood like we hid behind there for like a good like 5 minutes, and no, 5 minutes is like an overstatement. I think we like hid behind there for like maybe like 2-ish, 3-ish minutes, and then we like 3 minutes. Like he didn't live there, so then we went over. I don't know if he lived there. We went over and he's gone. Nobody seen him. But if you're getting followed, like. When you want to, like, fucking look and confront, no, bitch, he fucking, I don't know where the fuck he went. It was a dead end road. We would have seen if he walked. We would have heard if he walked, like, around us. We would have seen, like, And mind you, all the house lights they're still off. We could have heard them if we went in because we didn't like hide too far. And all the lights were off. All the houses dark as fuck. And also, mind you, there was like no cars around this time. Like there was nobody living out. So we were walking, no cars, no nothing, nobody out. And then we get to like the main road where I live, and then yeah, there was like cars going. Finally, it was weird. And mind you, there was a skunk that was after like when we were down, there was a skunk there. It was like fucking weird because what the fuck do you mean there's a skunk there? And then the whole time we were walking back, skunks were everywhere. What the fuck? There was no skunks before that, but there were skunks everywhere. Is he fucking skunk? I'm still confused about this till this day. If you have any personal like experience yourself, like any of you guys, write down in the comments, tell me because what the fuck. And also, if you guys have any stories, I would love to tell your guys' stories. Anonymous or not, if you want to tell me, go in the DMs. I will respond. Yes, bye.
We've got another audio ghost story from a lovely lady called Natu. I hope I've said your name right. Get ready because this one is both devastatingly sad and lovely.
Great. So I used to have a cat named Sina. She was a tuxedo cat, extremely sweet and beautiful. 7 years old, but she was very sick. She had a lot of chronic disease, and they were suspecting that she had some form of cancer, so she was under a lot of medications. Anyways, I moved to my new flat, and she got an allergic reaction to something, and then the veterinary discovered that she had another underlying condition which was making her life worse, and she would deteriorate rapidly. So I had to put her down, and she passed here in my arms, in my place, and it was, yeah, very sad. And I missed her extremely. So the first nights I was still feeling like the weight of her body between my legs, or like she was jumping on my bed. And I didn't think much of it. I thought it was my mind playing tricks, and probably it was. But then I started hearing her meowing. And then I thought, well, probably there are other cats in the building. But the walls are very good. I don't hear my neighbors. Long story short, I am here with my daughter one night, and we feel a scratch in the kitchen. We were both in the kitchen, sitting down after dinner, and we both froze. And I said her name, my cat's name, Sina. And a meow followed, like right there by the kitchen. Very muted, very, very quiet meow, but her meow. And my daughter, she doesn't live with me. She knew her also, and she knew her meow. Yeah, we both looked at each other, and we both started crying. And that was the last time I heard her. It didn't happen again. And those occurrences were happening around maybe a month, 2 months after her passing. Yeah, that's my little story. I have quite more, so if you like it, I will send you. Bye.
When you grow up in a haunted house, you don't really know what to expect. Get comfy and cozy, spooky, scary story time. I actually grew up in a haunted house in northern Alabama. I couldn't have been more than 15. I was homeschooling during my high school years due to some bullying that occurred at my previous school. For my own personal PE sessions, I would jog back and forth and blast music in the living room, which we called the den, because it was a newer addition to the house. Probably added sometime in the 80s or 90s, and it was completely built of large wooden planks on the insides. As I start my daily routine of exercise, I have the music going on, and every so often I can hear someone shout my name. It was coming from the kitchen area, which was very close to the den. I tried ignoring it, but finally paused my music to listen. Maybe it was paranoia at that moment, but I started to feel as if someone was watching me. I would say the air became really thick, but that could have just been my asthma, and I'm not one to lean into speculation before reason first. About halfway through my exercise routine, my sister comes down the stairs, fully dressed and ready to go out somewhere. I looked at her confused, and she let out a sigh and stated that she got called into work for a few hours, so I'd be left at home and to make sure I finish any schoolwork that I might have left for the day. I agreed, even though I was already done with the schoolwork for the rest of the week. I walked her to the door so I could lock it behind her, the music still playing in the den as we said our goodbyes and as she made the usual "I don't want to go to work" jokes and comments. I stood on the porch as she drove away and then went back inside and locked the door. As I made my way into the den to finish my pee, I was quickly shocked and terrified. Standing in front of me, just behind one of the couches, was a pale girl who had to be around 8 to 10 years old. She wore a white nightgown and had long hair, but a blurry face. It was something out of a horror scene. She wasn't even transparent. She was fully solid, yet not at the same time. In the split seconds that it happened, my brain and heart altogether just froze and stood still. Not even the moment after I saw her, she dropped to the floor, and I could audibly hear the thud as she hit the floor. And I watched in terror as she quickly crawled from behind one couch to behind the one just beside. Oh, fuck no. Imagine her crawling? Hell no. Okay. Not even the moment after I saw her, she dropped to the floor, and I could audibly hear the thud as she hit the floor. And I watched in terror as she quickly crawled from behind one couch to behind the one just beside it. I was so scared that I squeezed my eyes shut and yelled, "Go away!" before running downstairs to my mom and dad's bedroom. Whew, that's hella scary. I was crying and called my mom on the phone as she was trying to get me to calm down and prayed with me over the phone. I stayed in the bedroom for a while, but I kept hearing the footsteps of someone moving around upstairs and messing with things. Eventually, I went out the house and stayed in the yard until my other sisters came home from school. Hell no. First off, that girl crawling behind the sofa, I picture that shit, and that's so terrifying. And then you still hear noise going on out there when you're hiding in the bedroom? No. That's so scary. I don't know. I just creepy as hell.
Have y'all heard of Transylvania's Forbidden Forest in Romania? I'm talking about Hoia Baciu Forest. It is a hotspot for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Given the bizarre stories that happen in Hoia Baciu, some believe that it is a portal to some otherworldly place. One popular legend in Hoia Baciu is the legend of the shepherd. A shepherd had once entered Hoia Baciu with all of his sheep, and they all mysteriously disappeared. He and his sheep were never seen, and nobody knows what happened to this man. Another phenomena attached to Hoia Baciu is all of the UFO activity. In 1968, there was an official UFO sighting. A military technician named Emil Barnea had seen this UFO and even snapped a photo. So this photo, and then with the help of other sightings of lights and unexplained phenomena in the area, make locals believe that this is a hotspot for UFOs and other strange phenomena. In fact, the forest has been dubbed as the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania. So there is a spot in this forest called the Clearing. Legend has it that no trees or plants survive in this area, and it remains a blasted area where no life can survive. Some claim that this area is a spot with radiation, but there's no proof of that. Many claim they've also seen a lot of red lights in the forest all throughout them. And in 2014 on Ghost Adventures, they claim they had seen these red lights, although none of us can prove if that's credible or not. So take that with a grain of salt. The video of them seeing this red lights on Ghost Adventures is not the best quality, but the people who were recording swear that the light was stationary and it was in the forest. Another story is about a young girl who was left alone in the forest at age 5. Now 5 years later, this little girl came right back up and she was completely clean but wearing the same clothes. And she had no recollection of what happened to her. There's definitely some creepy shit going on in the forest, but who really knows what's going on? Follow for more creepy shit.
Bro, what's going on around?
What's one moment in your life where you felt like there might be something beyond this world? Hi everyone, welcome back to Candlelit Whispers with Amanda. Today I was going down a rabbit hole of some Reddit threads about extraterrestrial life, near-death experiences, and I found this story that made me stop in my tracks. The 3 minutes I was dead. I died for almost 3 minutes. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember arriving at the hospital. I don't remember the doctors trying to save me. But I remembered what happened when I left my body. My last memory on Earth was feeling myself being pulled out of the hospital bed. I couldn't see anything. The only thing that kept me connected to this world was my girlfriend holding my hand. And then I had this overwhelming feeling that everything was going to be okay. So I let go. There was no fear, and instead of floating above my body like you hear in most near-death experiences, I was being pulled straight through the hospital, through multiple floors, through the atmosphere, and then I was in space. Somehow I knew I could go anywhere instantly. I knew where the planets were, and I could travel to them without moving. So I thought, I want to see another planet with life, and instantly I was there. I couldn't see the beings living on it, but somehow felt there were billions of them. And then came the strangest part. I felt something I can't properly describe. Love, happiness, warmth, peace. It felt like every positive emotion, in every possible emotion imaginable multiplied by a million. There wasn't a single negative thought. I just floated through the universe completely content. I could have been there for seconds or billions of years because time didn't exist anymore. Then I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel the presence of love beside me. My father had died about 20 years earlier, so I asked, "Dad, is that you?" And I heard, "Yes, and everyone before you." And that's when I realized I wasn't just with my father. I was surrounded by every soul that had ever existed. And somehow I knew I belonged there. I didn't want to leave. It felt exactly like the heaven I had always imagined. Then without warning, I started getting pulled back. Like a movie playing in reverse, I fought it. I didn't want to go. But I was pulled faster and faster until suddenly I was back in my hospital bed. Doctors and nurses were everywhere. And the first thing I felt when I came back was my girlfriend holding my hand. That was the last thing I felt before leaving. But here's the part that still haunts me. When I woke up, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even put words together. I could understand what people were saying. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I just couldn't make my brain turn the thoughts into words. It took hours before I could communicate normally again. And to this day, I believe it was my soul slowly connecting with my body. That experience completely changed the way I see death. I don't fear death anymore, not because I want to die, but because for those 3 minutes, I experienced something that felt more peaceful and beautiful than anything I've ever known. Years later, the memory hasn't faded, not one detail. If anything, it's the clearest memory I have. I don't know what happens when we die, but after experiencing it, I'm not afraid to find out. Just not until it's my time. That story made me freeze and read the entire thing. I feel like near-death experiences are super interesting, and they make you question the universe. But if you've ever had a moment in your life where you felt like there was something beyond Earth, put it in the comments below.